So you recently tweeted, Afghanistan is the only true white country on earth. Please explain this to us.
Sure. When the Aryans left Africa.
Today I interview Persian scholar Sharghzadeh, struck by the East. He's a Sufi poet, a translator, and teacher of Persian poetry. His debut book of Rumi translations, The Flame of Love, is out now. I've long been a fan of his Twitter account and his posting. I think he's one of the greatest anthropologists working on Twitter today, and an exceptional emissary of Persian and Islamic civilization. I believe this podcast is extremely important. I truly believe that this conversation may go down as one of the most important conversations of the 21st century. The Greek interviews the Persian. The West meets the East. An emissary of Western civilization meets with and speaks with a great emissary of Islamic civilization. Perhaps we may be able to solve the great difficulties and problems between Western and Islamic civilization through the course of this conversation. Sharghzadeh, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the first question, and this is a very important one. While we are here, let us settle this once and for all. Who invented the gays, the Greeks or the Persians?
You know, I don't know if we can say who invented them, but I have an inkling that we got it from you, that it came to us, this culture that I've talked about on Twitter. And it's the most controversial thing I talk about, I think. In my classes, you have to bring it up because when you study medieval Islamdom, it's going to come up. And a few people will always be very upset. I've had people leave. But I think it might have, I mean, there's always people with inclinations, but the culture of it that we know in medieval Islamdom, and that becomes a problem. I'm sure we'll talk about this later with Muslim integration and all that. I think it might have come from Hellenization. Now, that's not to lay blame. You know, this is just my reading of it.
I think you're probably right, to be honest. I think the gays probably did invent homosexuality. Well, to be honest, it's probably just all human beings had that at some point or another time. But obviously, the great ancient Greeks, my ancestors, they did seem to they seem to enjoy this sort of thing.
I mean, we talked about this before, like how culture persists outside of where it's from, and I think this is just another example of that. But anyway, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, oh, that's interesting. Tell us about how. I mean, you teach classes of Persian poetry. And then this sometimes comes up, and you say some people have left. Explain that to us. That's very interesting.
Yeah, sure. So they say the past is a foreign country. When you read about the Middle Ages, there are just things you find that blow your mind. Some things are mundane, of course, you know, humans are humans, but there are elements of medieval life that modern people simply cannot wrap their minds around. And another thing is just the total normalization of pedophilia. And again, as a Westerner, this is like the worst possible thing. I mean, maybe even I hate to say that word because, you know, it's probably the algorithm and people people whinge when they hear it, but it's like the worst possible thing. And this is another thing in anthropology. Not every culture agrees on what's the worst possible sin or mistake or right. But in the West, it's considered that at the moment. And so when you bring this up and say that in Near Eastern civilizations, which you are a part of, the Greeks, in this specific instance, it was very normal. It can be difficult for people to just want to hear that. I mean, not to say I'm defending it, just this is fact.
Well,
this was the Middle Ages.
I know that like pederasty was a big thing in ancient Greece, and obviously to the Western mind, this is something that's just we just cannot understand it, and it's obviously incredible. And I suppose it does persist to an extent in places like Afghanistan.
For sure,
what's it called? Bachabazi?
Bachabazi, yeah. So this is a Persian phrase for it. Basically, this practice existed universally in the Near East all the way to Central Asia. It's just a matter of Afghanistan being the last non-modernized country in this spectrum. So if Afghanistan had been modernized, it would have disappeared, like it disappeared in Iran, like it disappeared in Greece, like it disappeared in Turkey, right? So they're just not modernized.
What do you think explains the struggle in Afghanistan with modernity? Is it just the fact that this is such an isolated country, the mountains, it can be so secluded? I mean, what explains it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, if you go the most, you have the weird society. So the most extreme edge is a society where institutions are everything. So when two Westerners, two Anglos have like a spousal dispute, they could call the police to adjudicate it. And even for maybe you, that would be astonishing, right? And on the very other end, you have something like tribal Arabia or Afghanistan, where there is essentially no institution, family structures and clans and kinship and patronage and and alliances, you know, are what institutions are. What I think happens is in a country like Saudi Arabia, it's just as pre-modern in Afghanistan as Afghanistan in terms of the mindset and the reality of how the society functions. It's just their wealth and connections with the West allows them to have this like veneer of institutions floating above. So when a Westerner looks, they see, oh, look, it looks modern because they have big buildings and whatnot. Afghanistan just doesn't have that wealth, but the function, the kind of the end effect is the same, right? So at the ground level, people are tracking their wives with their phone, and you know, that weird pre-modern Muslim homosexuality still also exists, by the way, I've heard. So Afghanistan just doesn't have the wealth, and America tried to do that, right? So there's no oil, but America brought the money, and somehow because it wasn't locally led or there are tribal disputes, it just didn't work. So I don't know, maybe it's just not fixable.
I mean, it's really interesting because if you looked at, like, for example, standard leftist theory about like the American war in Afghanistan, they would be talking about America extracting wealth from Afghanistan.
No, it's such a joke. Yeah,
I know. I mean, realistically, like, there's no natural resources really there, is there?
No, this is the biggest stupid talking point. I mean, about Iraq, at least you could say, look, they have tons of oil. Well, guess what? It would have been cheaper to just buy the oil on the free market than to topple the government. And by the way, Iraq's oil was documented. It was just sold on the open market, and the Iraqi government coffers were filled up. They put these pictures of like an American soldier with like the gold in Saddam's palace and be like, look why America was there. Okay, so we spent like $20 trillion on these two boondoggles. So Afghanistan's the same. I mean, no amount of resources could be extracted to make up for the human lives and the political capital and the money and just this disaster and all the reputational damage that liberalism in America and what. I think this was just Anglo naivete, this idea that if you get rid of the tyrants, that everyone would become 90210, would be living in LA and drive around with a Range Rover and have a liberal life. It's just not true. Some parts of the world don't want to be liberal, and Western liberals just have to accept that and learn to confront that reality.
Yeah, look, this is something that it's hard for me to understand, because I mean, it's hard for me to accept because I'm, you know, ideologically liberal. I believe in, you know, individual freedom and all that sort of thing. But of course, I think you are right that there are some parts of the world that, you know, liberalism is not a tradition, and it's not something that the actual population wants. And I think there's a very good example of this that people use to sort of satirize the Western intervention in Afghanistan. There's a video showing some kind of Western NGO that was trying to sort of teach art history to Afghan women. And
art history in Afghanistan.
You probably have seen the video somewhere, but someone brought up like the Duchamp, you know, that 1920s French art piece, and it's literally just a urinal.
Oh my God! Yes, and they're trying to explain this to them. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and they're trying to explain this to them, and like in the footage, you can see like blank stares and incomprehension. And a lot of people have said at the end of the day, like, this is so emblematic of what the West was trying to do in Afghanistan. And
no, that's perfect. I mean, it reminds me so there's this really weird event where basically it seems like certain Afghan refugees trying to get to Iran might have drowned or burned to death somehow tragically, like in a car that was shot by the I don't know exactly what happened, but there was this hashtag "We Can't Breathe." And in front of the U.S., Lord Miles posted it. That in front of the U.S. Embassy, there was a picture of George Floyd and a picture of an Afghan person with like flames saying, "I can't breathe," with the Iranian flag in the background. And Lord Miles said, I asked someone, who is this? And someone said, like, it's Obama or something. So it's like, you're just dealing with societies that are not. I mean, I remember there was an interview in rural Afghanistan.
Oh my God.
Where they showed a picture of 9/11 happening to like tribal elders in the most remote corner of the country. And they said, where is this? And it was a picture of the Twin Towers. And they said, oh, it's in Kabul. So, I mean, you're just dealing with a different society that's not in the Western zeitgeist. Like, Westerners assume, like, I met a Westerner who said, oh my God, I met someone in like Egypt and they said they didn't know what the elf was, like the movie. And I'm like, what? Like, they just assume that people are just on the Western zeitgeist wavelength values. It's just not the case.
That's quite funny. I mean, but compared to Afghanistan, Egypt is like so much more integrated.
For sure, but even there, even despite all the penetration of the movies, you know, British and the French and the, you know, colonization and the movies and music and language, still it's a different society. You know, they have different values, different interests.
Of course. I mean, George Floyd in Afghanistan is such like a. There was a period where like. There was basically the period of like 2020 to 2023, maybe, which was sort of like peak wokeness, and probably that could be taken as the greatest representation of peak wokeness, doing a mural to George Floyd in Afghanistan.
Right, yeah.
And it's just actually sad, but the whole thing's kind of sad. And I don't know, like Afghanistan is probably like the most remote society on earth. I mean, it's probably harder to imagine a society more remote from sort of globalization and then going there and trying to make it sort of modern democratic country. At the same time, it's sad because there clearly was kind of like an educated sort of middle class that was emerging in Kabul.
Right, yeah.
And for like an entire generation of young girls that were part of that class, they probably had no. I mean, there certainly was. They grew up without the Taliban. They grew up where more rights for women were.
Right, yeah.
And so, I mean, that part to me is really sad. This is actually an interesting question. The whole Taliban hardcore extremist sort of approach to, for example, like gender relations, modern life, society. I mean, there's an argument to be made that this is actually not really even Islam, but it's kind of like,
for sure, yeah.
It's part of sort of Pashtunwali, like it's kind of like a subset of Pashtun.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
sure.
Could you explain that argument too?
Yeah, sure. So basically, most people get religion and culture, they put the cart before the buggy or the buggy before the cart. They think that a society adopts a religion and then that informs what the value of the society becomes, right? So they think, oh, Protestantism emphasizes hard work. So the Dutch and the English started the Industrial Revolution and capitalism. Well, if that was true, why doesn't Jamaica become a first world country? They're Protestant. Or in West Africa. No, it's these societies are already hardworking, and they post facto rationalize it with Christianity, right? You could pick and choose. You can say the rich won't go into heaven, or you can say that God blesses you with wealth, right? So the same thing is true with Islam. Persianate culture, and the Pashtuns are an Iranic people, so they're part of this, was very dogmatic about the segregation of women. Zoroastrianism had some of the strongest rules, even worse than Judaism, regarding menstruation and women's rights. And all these things. I
didn't know that about
Zoroastrianism. Yeah, it's kind of, we don't like to talk about it because we like to say, oh, ancient Persia, but no, this is a fact. So essentially what happens is when Islam enters Iran, my perception of it is that our extremely strict gender segregation and full veiling of women, which was in Iran until our liberal king Reza Shah got rid of it. We had the same exact gender segregation and all that. I think that's just representative of elite class culture. So elite women were veiled and they didn't go out because that was dangerous, etc. I mean, things you guys can imagine. So that was basically imposed upon the religion of Islam and made part of Islam. So it was the other way around. We made that part of Islam. It's not that Islam brought this to us, because Bedouin women wouldn't cover their hair. Bedouin women would be out and about and would be visible, right? Travel logs show this. So I think what happened is this culture persists only among the rural parts of Afghanistan, or just Afghan society generally, because it just they're the last holdover, right? So urban Iranians were liberalized, and then rural Iranians were liberalized, and then urban Afghans are liberalized in Kabul, like you said, this class emerged, and then in rural Afghanistan's the last holdout, and now these people have taken power and they want to reimpose. So it's just like they're the last remnant. And it's ironic because it used to be associated with being an elite person, and now we associate with being poor and backwards and all that. So that's my view on it, essentially.
Do you think they will be successful in imposing this onto Afghan society, given that this kind of there was an entire generation that grew up without the Taliban?
Right. Yeah.
Like I think the median age in Afghanistan is like 18 or 19. It's a really young country.
Right. Yeah.
And so like probably even a majority of Afghans like were not even alive when 9/11 happened.
Right.
So
It's interesting.
Do you think it's possible that they can succeed in this sort of project of bringing back this kind of old sort of backwards sort of cultural practice to a society that's very young and has...
It's a good question. It depends how much ground, how much ground level support it enjoys. I really don't know enough to comment. I mean, one would say that this society that spent like 20 years being semi-liberalized, and then decades ago in the 60s, they also had like a liberal kind of era, at least in the upper classes. If they would yearn for that, I mean, who knows? It could be that ultimately it's because they can't provide economic results. My sense is that, especially in my part of the world, it's just about the economics, right? Why was there a revolt against the left-leaning liberal order? Because of inflation and migration. It's just about bread and butter. So I think the Taliban probably will ultimately not be able to develop the economy that well, and maybe that will foment discontent. But I don't know. I mean, it seems like they've succeeded so far, and who will replace them is the bigger issue, because they don't have a civil society. And I mean, America tried and failed, right? They don't have those
Yeah.
built-in. I mean, the best case would have been to reinstate their monarchy, right? They had a chance to do that, and they didn't for some reason. But then the monarchy is the institution that enjoys legitimacy, that can be, kind of convinced to liberalize a bit, like what happened in Iran. So I don't know.
Yeah.
We might have to wait and see. And in a way, it's kind of terrible to say this because they're a country full of normal, good people, but maybe it's just interesting to observe it from afar and see, what is a society that is fully shut off from modernization going to do? Will their birth rate go up or down, or will they persist the way they are? Or will they internally be forced to modernize a bit? Can they persist the way? Who knows? Maybe it was just interesting to observe it and see it as a test case. They're the only country with a positive birth rate right now, or growing birth rate perhaps in the whole world.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something to be gleaned there from what they're doing.
That's interesting. I mean, this feeds into, the question of, like, sort of the crisis of legitimacy that is plaguing. It's plaguing the West, but it's also even plaguing, China, East Asia.
Yeah,
everywhere.
that's very true.
Everywhere fertility is sort of crashing, and people aren't having families, and people are struggling. What do you think is behind this? I mean, this is this huge mega trend, but
yeah, I think there was just this moment where humanity crossed a threshold where we didn't have to follow paths that were just set up by default because of constraints. And these constraints, I think, were just set by scarcity. So we have essentially almost globally entered a post-scarcity world. Like, really, no one's going hungry anymore in almost the whole world. Everyone has a smartphone. Everyone's on TikTok. I mean, yeah, there's poverty, but it's relative. Like, no one's genuinely really poor outside of, sub-Saharan Africa and like a few places scattered. But basically every society that we would think of is more or less there, right? And once you reach post-scarcity and a level of security, I mean, think about what made women get married. If you didn't get married, you'd be hungry. And if you got divorced, you would be vulnerable. And so all these factors are gone, and people can just live fulfilled lives. And then only the people who are personally motivated would have kids anymore, right? And having kids is kind of a big hassle, and it's difficult, and it's a lot of work. A lot of people just think, I'm not that interested anymore, really. I mean, you take away the Catholics losing their belief in the anti-contraceptive thing, and the economy is also hard and relative, right? Like, it's easier now than ever, but our demands are higher than they've ever been as well, right? No one wants to, like the guy Hickman on Twitter, he talks about, no one wants to live on beans and rice the way this guy talks about on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's just that. It's literally just, we're not on this default path anymore. People stop, actually, that's not that fun. So I really think it's just that. It's that simple.
I think you're right there, that it really is just basically a product of economic modernization, and accompanying economic modernization seems to be just, I mean, this is something that we see basically everywhere, secularization. And so obviously like the West secularized first, and Europe, I mean, it's interesting because America is actually still a very religious country.
It is, yeah, it is.
There's still very high rates of church attendance when compared to, say, like Europe. And it's interesting because, I guess it's interesting because America is still a very religious country. So in some sense, it's, I don't know, what do you say? What do you sense in this? I mean, America, do you see it as a secular country or a religious country?
Well, it's secular in theory, right? I mean, on the books, it's secular. But let me put it this way. We've never had a non-Christian president. And I don't think we could ever have a non-Christian president in the near future. I mean, let's be real. People like Trump, I mean, he just was inaugurated. He didn't even put his hand on the Bible. He's been a serial, philanderer and all kinds of things. And Obama is very obviously like a secular humanist type. I don't think he cares anything about religion. And going back before, Bush probably was a genuine believer. Clinton, I mean, come on. Let's keep it real. These guys are all just secular humanists with a Christian background, but they all have to do the make-believe song and dance. And I think it still might be true. Bill Maher always says this, that atheist is the most discriminated against category. If you ask people, there's a nominee in your political party who's black, who's Muslim, who's woman, who's Chinese, who's XYZ, over 50% would say, yes, I would vote for that person, except if you say they're atheist. So white male, if you're a white male Democrat, you're a Democrat, but an atheist. I don't know. So there is some religious element. And we are the only Western country that I know of that still is moored by traditional Christian morality. Like, there's a lot of shame regarding sexuality, even though we're kind of fully sexually liberalized. Like, we're getting to the point where every American has premarital sex as like just a normal thing. but there's no openness about it like in Europe. Like in Europe, you walk down the street and you see like naked women in the windows in a red light
like red
district,
light
and
districts of
porn on TV and porn magazines in the store. When I was a kid visiting Europe with my family tried to like shield me, but even I, as a little kid, before I knew what sexuality was, just found that odd. Like one time, we were like at a convenience store, and I said, "Dad, why is there like naked people? Aren't people supposed to wear them?" My dad was like, "Come on, get over here." America still is moored by Christian norms. You know, we were banning porn in some states. Like they're making that 18-year-old verification, and then Pornhub just goes away. Like, no, we don't want to be in the state. So America is very religious in a way. I mean, religion is even having a resurgence among Gen Z. Like it's becoming more popular than it was among the millennials.
That's true.
I mean, you got to consider, just last thing, you got to consider as a country founded by religious extremists, like people who are punted out of Europe because they're so religious.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's true about the sort of Gen Z return to religion, because I think new atheism definitely got like sort of typecast as very cringe and like sort of like Reddit.
It did, yeah. It's cringe. Let's be real. And
yeah, even me, like I mean, I identify as a Christian. I'm probably not the best Christian in that I don't go to church as often as I should, etc. But like, it was probably actually a bit of a reaction on my part to the kind of like really hardcore materialism of the new atheists. You know that meme where it's like we are just a bunch of atoms and in a
I know this cringe, lame Reddit,
that whole cringe thing, which is like full on nihilism. And it's like, will you trust the atoms in your brain to tell you that there is nothing, or will you stand and fight?
It's the worst. It's so cringe.
I know. So I think that's partly behind it. It's very interesting though, because I mean, do you think there is secularization in, you know, Iran and the Middle East right now? I mean, I know that the Saudi elite led by MBS is trying to track a more secular path in a way. I mean, he's still obviously I mean, it's funny because you go on Twitter and you see the Takfiris will say he's not a Muslim. MBS is actually Jewish. He's a fake Muslim, all this stuff. Oh my God, there's Beyonce in Riyadh, therefore he's not a Muslim. He's still a Muslim, like, king, basically. I know he's crown prince, but he's still like a Muslim king.
But definitely Muslim. I don't think I think most people consider him a Muslim. I mean, this is a bit,
of course. It's just the Takfiri sort of thing.
Right.
But he is sort of, he's certainly tracking in a way more moderate direction than,
for sure,
you know, what it was.
Yeah.
Because the interesting thing is, I think 15, 20 years ago, you could say Saudi Arabia actually was basically almost on par with like the Taliban when it came to women.
Yeah, I think there's some truth there, definitely. Especially even earlier than that. Yeah, I think so.
And Iran, which is often attacked as being a bad place for women in the world, was certainly much better than Saudi Arabia up until very recently.
Yeah. So I think even still on the societal level, Iran is much more liberalized for women than Gulf states. I traveled to 4 of the 6 Gulf states, and I lived in one for a year. Some of them, like a country like Kuwait where I lived, hijab is optional, but I think a much larger percentage of women are coerced by culture and family than in Iran, if that makes sense. So I think still Iran is it's kind of this weird situation where on a grassroots level, we're a very liberal society, but the state is kind of trying to change that. But what I would say is a guy like, I mean, one thing, because I know Arabic, I can see what's being said in the societies. And so MBS says in Arabic, I'm not like a reformer or liberal. I just want to go back to what we were before this, you know, Wahhabism and extremism and Takfirism started. So you could say maybe going before people like Sayyid Qutb showed up, you know, Muslim societies were maybe not liberal by modern Western standards, certainly by contemporary Western standards, were liberal societies. When you had the hippie trail, Americans and Europeans were driving from Istanbul to Afghanistan to Delhi. I mean, clearly it wasn't so scary and illiberal and dangerous if all these, like, you know, non-hijab wearing white women are smoking weed with Afghan villagers. So there's a lot of truth to say that this extremism that we see is a reaction born from insecurity, because Islam knows it's a weak, like, even you could say dying in a way, civilization. So this is a reaction to kind of revive it and be more orthodox and go back to our roots, and so to speak. And they're reacting against what they view as the encroachment of modernity, and because they know it's a tide, you know, it's an insurmountable tide, liberalism, modernity. When you have TikTok, when you have young people seeing the world, they want what exists out there, right?
I mean, it just seems to be impossible to have economic, success, modernity,
Right.
without having the accompanying cultural liberalization.
No, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah. This is why governments like Iran have tried to strike a balance, right? So Iran follows more like the Ikhwan al-Muslimin, the Muslim Brotherhood strand, where the
Yeah,
idea is we will import the trappings of modernity and even appeal to them. So Iran talks about how
yeah,
feminist we are. Look, the majority of our students are women. Women are in all these
yeah.
positions. We have a woman in the
True.
cabinet. We have a woman here. We have a woman there. Women are, I mean, the Iranian government talks about women, and the Taliban would never do that, right? The Iran's like, look how
That's true.
proud we are of our women.
I have
Right?
actually seen like videos where like Khamenei is talking almost like as though he's a feminist, which is like very interesting
Right.
to
They
a
want to
Western.
adopt parts. I mean, you look at Arab Islamists, they always talk about how important it is to have women. So they want all the trappings of the West. They wear suits and ties. They want all the Western institutions.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Syria right now. The guy
Yeah.
looks like just
Oh
like
my
a
God, that's
pure
so
liberal.
interesting.
He
That's
looks
so
like a liberal.
See,
But they
this
want
is
it moored by
yeah,
religion is the thing.
yeah. See, the funny thing is, I guess since October 7, I became quite a strident critic of Islamism, like
All
extremism.
right.
And
Yeah.
I understand there are different strands of Islamism.
Mhm.
I mean, it's really interesting to me because I look at al-Sharaa in Syria, and
Right.
obviously there've been like Russian propagandists who've come out and been like, oh, look, here's an isolated video of like a lynching. Therefore, there's violent, like, therefore, they're turning Syria back into ISIS. But it's not like that at all, really. Based on what we can currently see, it really isn't.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they literally have I think they appointed like a woman who did not wear a veil as like the
They
central
did. Yeah.
banker, to the
They did.
central
Yeah.
bank, a governor of a province as well. Al-Sharaa like talks about institutions. It's just so interesting. And like,
Right.
to
Yeah.
me, I look at it and I'm like, at this point in time, obviously the fear would be that, this is how they act while they're still consolidating power. But
Right. Yeah.
right now, as I see it, Al-Sharaa is saying things that I can't have any problems with, as a Westerner. I'm like, if you still want to have an Islamic society, but as long as it's, as long as there's no like stonings of minorities and things like that, like I've got no problems with this
Yeah.
sort of thing. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think certain strands of Muslim Brotherhood style thought, not to say that he is part of that, but you can essentially
Yeah.
say Islamists who are modernist in their outlook and more
Yeah.
open-minded. They're kind of like 1950s America, basically, where you
Yeah.
want all the elements of modernity and the development, but you want it to be moored by Christian values, so to speak. So Americans in
Yeah.
the 50s still had everything we have today. They had premarital sex and dating, but people got married if they got pregnant and they were private about it.
Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, they wouldn't be that far, right? So maybe they would be more like the 40s in America, you could say. But ultimately,
Yeah.
they want a normal society. They don't want beheadings and amputations. And I mean, even in Saudi Arabia, that kind of,
Yeah.
I feel like that stopped. So I don't think we're looking at a world where any Muslim society, maybe aside from Afghanistan going forward, will be having
Yeah.
those like stereotypical images of barbarism that scare Westerners. I think the only
Yeah.
direction is to move away from that. That's proven itself to be a failure. So even if Shara
Yeah.
believes in that, right, Jolani Shara, whatever, I think Shara is his
Yeah.
real name. So
Yeah.
whatever
That's his real name.
Jolani believes, even if for cynical reasons, he just knows that that's not going to work. That's been tried. The
Yeah.
Raqqa, right? They tried that. It's not going to work.
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. I saw some guy say like Shara is literally just a cynical politician, and that's why he's good, because if he's actually a
Yeah,
politician,
maybe.
he realizes he can't do like the
Right. Yeah.
stonings anymore in 2020. Yeah, I mean, look, that's the case. It's
And
good.
one important thing to keep in mind for Westerners who want, everything yesterday, he led a kind of a jihadi,
I
kind of
know. Yeah,
extremist Sunni movement, and all of
yeah,
his foot soldiers are in theory ideological believers, right? These people who show up
yeah.
from China and Chechnya, so he can't just get them
Well,
on
yeah,
board with a
Uyghurs from
fully. He has to
there's Uyghur
build
fighters. Yeah,
consensus with them. He has to get all of his people who are fighting a holy war on board to run a chiller society, and he needs time to kind of bring everyone to the table, so to speak.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm certainly not someone who's going to be like, we should cancel Al-Sharaa for not introducing like trans rights to Syria.
Yeah.
Let's be realistic.
Mhm.
Like it's a step. It's like I think almost anything's better than Assad, given like the barbarity
For
there.
sure, yeah.
And like as long as there's no like, I mean, as long as it's basically like not Taliban tier, I think it's so much better than Assad. And it's
Yeah, I think it'll be like definitely won't be that bad. I mean, look, Syria, I even tweeted this already. Syria has always been a cosmopolitan, kind of liberal-ish society. It's been at the crossroads. They were, I mean, Gulf Arabs would call them leftover Romans is kind of like an insulting thing. But that really shows you that they're viewed as part of like a greater kind of civilization. When Arabs conquered Damascus, they were in awe of how civilized it was. This is not a place that will devolve into like Taliban style government, and if just give them some time, I think. I mean, maybe it won't be the cup of tea of a Westerner, but many parts of the world are not, right? But it'll be acceptable. It'll be, you can live with it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my approach when it comes to these things. Like I think, like, obviously that, like, I really hate the Taliban because, like, they literally are banning women from schools and stuff like that. But, like, if they were to just run a society like, I don't know, what Sharia is doing, where, like, you know, it's more by Islamic cultural values, etc. But there's no, like, if somehow the Taliban just, like, were to allow women to go to school and stop stoning people and stuff like that, like, I wouldn't be, you know, an obsessive hater of it. If you get what I mean.
I think I know why the Taliban care about women's schooling. So first of all, it has nothing to do with Islam. There were, you know, one of the earliest universities in the world was founded by women, and there were early women scholars and X, Y, and Z. We've all heard this spiel before. I think they correctly realize that not Islamic education, right? Because memorizing the Quran and Hadith is different, but contemporary notions of school, they only will lead down the path of modernization. Because let's say you send girls up to 6th grade, then they'll want to go to 12th grade, then they'll want to go to college, then they'll want to get a master's and a PhD. And then a woman with a PhD is not going to want to have 12 kids and be a third wife, right?
You know what's really interesting? Osama bin Laden, one of his wives had a PhD. It's like...
Yeah, so some of these Islamists
really
are kind of like, they're
quite
fully
modern in a way.
Yeah, they're modern, and that's kind of why they're rebels against their own system, so to speak. Like Ayman al-Zawahiri was like an eye surgeon. Osama bin Laden came from a highly westernized Saudi family where they would speak English and vacation in the West. And he has like a brother who's like a rock and roller or something like that. So these people, in a way, I mean, the Taliban are actually just trads, right? But people such as bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri are, in a way, reactions against the modernity that they've seen. But in any case, I think the Taliban is correct in their assessment. Again, I don't agree with it, but they're correct in their assessment that women getting schooled is the #1 stepping stone, is the non-negotiable. Because they get schooled, then they'll want a job, then they won't have kids, and your birth rate will go down, then you'll become a modernized society.
The counterpoint to that, obviously, though, is like, what's the use of having 12 children if it's in dirt?
I agree. I don't understand their commitment to it, but they must feel very strong. I mean, look, they fought a 20-year protracted conflict to have their right to do this. So they must feel very strongly about it. I don't know why, but they do.
It's so interesting, this this part to the Islamic extremist movement, where, like, I read a biography of bin Laden, and basically said, like, you know, like, he had like satellite television in his compound in a Abbottabad, and he would watch it every single day, and like, he like sort of built his own kind of like media studio in his own house, and like he would have his like wives film him, and they would like, they'd go around the table and act as though he was doing TV interviews. It's so interesting, like, because
so fascinating.
Well, that's actually what it said in the book. Like,
oh my God.
It basically had like the last sort of 6 months of his life in Abbottabad, and they were watching the Arab Spring, and bin Laden was like sort of like they'd go around the table at night, and like he talked to his wives, like some of the. It's interesting because he had like multiple wives, and one of them was he married her at a really young age, and I don't think she was educated. She was a Yemeni girl, but there was also one who was Alawite, which is so interesting, and there was also another. And there's also one and like the Alawites, like the Takfiris hate Alawites so much.
His mother was an Alawite, I think, by the way.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think exactly.
That might be where that connection comes from. But in any case,
I might have got that. Yeah.
People like him, I feel they're marked by modernity, and they can never fully disengage from it. I mean, they joke. I don't know how real this is. That on his computer he had memes, and he would use 4chan or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think that part, but he did, like, he wasn't an obsessive watcher of TV though, like.
Right. So he kind of is a kind of an evil mastermind in a way. So he recognizes that he can kind of touch and play with modern things a bit, but that ultimately he disagrees with it and it should go away. I mean, their whole strand in Saudi society, represented before him by the guy who took over the Kaaba in 1979, which very few people know about, was a reaction. I mean, when they built radio towers and TV stations in Saudi, that's when his movement started, right? And that was shocking for them. You go from living essentially, and I talked to someone whose grandpa was raised in 1920s Iran and moved to New York City. And he said it moved from 1200 from 1220 to 1920 or something such as that, right?
Yeah.
You go from mud one-story houses and you see the Empire State Building being built and the
It's
Brooklyn Bridge.
amazing.
So these people were seeing the start of that transition. And again, some people don't want to be modern, and if they want to opt out, as much as we hate that, I don't know what to say. I mean, we can't.
I mean, America has the Amish. America has the
Right,
Amish.
exactly. I was going to say that.
Yeah.
So America, the whole thing about can Syria just be tolerable for Westerners? America has a lot of places where they just kind of only tolerate it. You know, you go to these evangelical Christians and the Amish and the Orthodox Jews, but they're at a level of tolerable, right? Because they're not policing and they're not, you know, they don't have a Sanhedrin to behead anyone for saying Yahweh or something like that. So we just let it go, you know. So we're willing to tolerate our own religious people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's actually a very interesting thing. This is an interesting question I want to ask you, because maybe I've gotten Islamism wrong, because obviously, like, Islamism is kind of like used. It's hard to describe what we're talking about when we're talking about Islamic extremism, right? Because, like, I guess in the West, we often use the shorthand Islamism, but as you noted, there were the Islamists and like the Muslim Brotherhood sort of perspective where they do want to have the accoutrements of modernity, like still moored with Islamic values, and then that's obviously very different to sort of the actual, I guess, the Wahhabi return to like literally 1,000 years ago type thing. I mean, like, is it possible to talk about an Islamism, or like, how would you describe these kinds of people? Like, what's the best shorthand for it? Is it like Takfiri? Is it Wahhabi? Like, how do we describe? Because clearly there is a movement of extremism, but I guess it's hard to describe.
Right, yeah. There's so many different, I mean, there are circles that they intersect at some level and they don't intersect at another level. So, for example, Wahhabis, as they're called because of their founder, Abdul Wahhab, although they themselves just call themselves Salafis, or even just Muslims, because they insist that they just represent what Islam is. Most of them are quiet. So people like bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and ISIS are the vast minority of the activist jihadi ones. The vast majority of them are quietists who support the Gulf states. So in the Gulf states, you find them in places like Philadelphia and Germantown. You have Black American converts who support them, but they essentially view the Gulf states as full obedience. The Gulf states are correct. They believe maybe they're actually way more extreme in a way than people like the Muslim Brotherhood, but because they're quietists, they're just totally harmless. Right. And they support the state, you know, to a fault, even to the point of saying you should report people to the state security services for not being, you know, if they're going to go against the state and rebel, if they're an activist. So they actually hate each other. They mutually despise each other. So even within the group of Salafis, there's just two completely irreconcilable camps of activists and quietists. And this strain is called Medkhali because they're the person who started it is his last name is Medkhali, basically this full support to the Saudi state and the Gulf states. And then generally, so they may or may not be takfiri, right? So some of them might be quick to disassociate people from religion or not. The quietest ones are takfiri, but they're much lighter with the takfir. Because if you were to apply it illiberally, you know, it would go to liberally, I should say, it would go to even the Gulf state rulers. Like, look at some.
I mean, it'd go to like 90. It'd go to 90%.
Right.
Muslim.
So then the jihadi ones are more likely to be takfiri. Say, we'll kill all the Shias. We'll do this. So the non-jihadi ones, they'll say Shias are barely Muslim, but they're still Muslim kind of, right, at some level. And then the people who are neither of them. I guess the quietest ones aren't really Islamists. Well, they're all Islamists because they all want Islam. And this is kind of the problem with the word Islamist. All Muslims at some level want society to be informed by Islam. Right? Like if you ask me, do you want less premarital sex or more? Or do you want less alcohol consumed or more? Even me as like a very open-minded person will say, yeah, I want less alcohol. So I don't know, am I Islamist?
I don't like. I'm not an Islamist, but I don't drink. Like, you know,
right. So I think when we say Islamist, we mean you have a zeal to push it on everyone, right? So in that case, the activist Salafis are that. The quietists are not. They have no zeal. They're saying, don't say anything about the concerts in Riyadh or whatever. And then the Ikhwan types and the Iranian government are kind of what we really imagine when we think Islamists. Like, they want to come in and implement Islam in society using the modern state technology, which is what makes it different than pre-modern Islamic. Before modernity, we had this idea, but there was no technology to actually enforce it, right? The issue is the modern state's technology can be very ugly as well. It can look very ugly when you want to enforce religion. So that's what I would say it is. So you have the quietists who are kind of just harmless, the activist Salafis who are probably the most dangerous. And then you have people like the chillest end would be like Erdogan, right? And Erdogan's like the chillest Sunni modernist Islamist. Sharat Jalani's in the middle.
It's funny because like as a Greek, I have to be against Erdogan, but like I don't know, like I am against
So,
Erdogan, but I mean, compared to the Taliban, obviously, it's a
right, it's not
different
even
kettle of
close,
fish.
right? It's not even. I
Yeah,
mean, they're
yeah,
at complete opposite ends of a spectrum, basically,
yeah, of
right? And
course.
I should say, almost all Muslims are within this spectrum. It's important for
Yeah,
non-Muslims to understand the amount of Muslims who are on the other side of Erdogan, who are just fully secular, fully liberal. There
oh, it's
exists.
very
They're the
small.
elite in our societies, and they're
Yeah,
Western Muslims are mostly in this category. In most, not like in the UK, but in America, Canada,
yeah,
mostly in
yeah.
this category. But
I
most
definitely want
Muslims who
to get
are,
to the
go
UK.
ahead.
Oh no, no,
Yeah,
sorry.
we'll get to the
Yeah,
UK.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
just want to say
Yeah, you keep
most
going.
Muslims are like on this end of the Islamist scale where they, if you ask them, they want those things, but they just
Yeah,
don't feel zealous. They're not going to like fight to do anything about it. You know, they're just saying theory,
yeah.
yes, but reality, not really. I don't care.
'Cause, it's interesting. Like, if you ask me, like, do you want a society that's informed by Christian moral values in the sense of like, thou shalt not kill, you know,
Yeah.
like, of course I'd be like, yes, but it's
Yeah.
like, I guess I think maybe the distinction is between like the sort of supremacists, because like how there are also like the supremacist Christians who go out and they're the ones that like they try and troll Ben Shapiro by screaming like Christ is king like into his ear,
Right.
like
Yeah. They got Nick
those
Fuentes,
yeah,
American
literally,
First House. Yeah.
and
Yeah. They're good
I
and
think probably
analogous. Exactly. They're kind of
yeah.
like your Islamists, the integralists
Well,
and the Catholics.
that's the funny thing. Like, I've actually compared Nick Fuentes before to a kind of like sort of Islamist and extremist, and
For
then
sure.
people
For
go,
sure.
and it's funny because like I made that comparison, and like I got all these like really, because you get these naive Western leftists who like they think that like anyone who's not white must be like like I don't know, I don't know what it
Morally
is like.
good, they're
Yeah,
oppressed, you know,
they
we
they
should go
basically,
easier on them. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
this is the funny thing, right? Like, in my experience, literally every society and culture can produce its own kind of like localized variant of like fascism and like
For sure, yeah.
supremacism. Like, there are Greek supremacists, there are Greek fascists. Like, obviously there's this sort of like Christian Nick Fuentes types that are like literal
Mhm.
supremacists. And I guess the way I see the sort of the extremist end of Islamism is it's almost like its own kind of supremacist movement. And that's why
For sure,
I
yeah.
really strongly dislike it, because I'm like, the whole it's all about like sort of forcing things on people, and I think that's how to understand it. It's a sort of supremacist movement, but like, of course, like there's sort of these naive Western liberals who can't accept that. They think that like only the West is capable of fascism or something like that. I think that's kind of what they think,
Right,
that only
yeah,
white
yeah.
people are capable of fascism. So when I
It's kind of
don't,
like Western supremacy in a different lens, right? Only
yeah,
we're
yeah,
evil. The other one says only we're good, and the other one says only we're evil.
yeah, that's the funny thing. It's kind of like literally reverse Orientalism. So
Right,
I think
yeah.
I think what happened was I think the joke I made, it was one of my viral posts that got I think got like 1 million views or whatever. And I basically was comparing Nick Fuentes to like a Yemeni Houthi. And that, like like that's kind of the society he wants at the end of the day, right?
In a way, yeah,
No,
you're right. In
yeah,
a way,
like no immigration. It's an ethno state. Like, it's almost like a pure sort of ethno
basically,
state.
yeah.
There are no Jews. The flag of the country is like curse the Jews. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
obviously
yeah. You're
that's in
right.
the
No,
Houthi
you're
area.
right. It's
Yeah.
very there's a lot there. Yeah.
And so I mocked Nick Fuentes. I was like, he's got the views of kind of like a Yemeni goat herder. And I got all these sort of like Western naive liberals who were like, how dare you, like, the West invented fascism, but you can only view
Oh
fascism through the
Lord.
lens of like brown people bad. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying like it's an ironic point that like these people have more in common with each other than they realize.
Well, I've said that
Yeah.
actually. Well, first of all, Nick Fuentes is the most self-aware, because he always talks about how Iran is great, how Muslims are
And he
great,
loves
how
the
base
Taliban.
win, win Taliban and base Taliban, all these
Yeah.
things. Some of them are not conscious about that. Some
Yeah.
more naive ones, when you tell them that you resemble Muslims more than anything, they get very offended at that.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah. I know.
there's a lot
Yeah.
of truth there, that and this is why I say people like Nick Fuentes, the tragedy is actual white people from their point of view. I'm willing to accept you and him and all Westerners as just white vaguely in the sense we understand, but from their racial point of view, that WASP, British, Anglo,
Of course.
Germanic, Protestant.
They call me like an Arab or whatever. Like,
You're not white. You're not white.
funny.
Yeah, you're Greek.
Yeah.
You're a
Yeah.
Greek. So
The
gay
more-
Reek or whatever they say. But yeah,
they're like theories. That like the extremist
or
white
race.
nationalists
Yeah,
are, like,
they're
have
white
theories.
tech theories.
Yeah.
They're
Like
white tech
Italians and Greeks like aren't part of the white nation. It's funny.
Yeah, you're Italian. So those people that Nick Fuentes loves, the most dense societies full of those people. So you have places like the Nordics, northern UK, Scotland, and the northeastern United States. Well, guess what? Those are the most liberal, high trust, harmonious
ever.
societies. Nick Fuentes' point of view is representative of his white ethnic background, of him being Polish and Italian and Mexican. These points of view, so that's the deep irony of it. He's at the farthest periphery, imposing ethnic, Mediterranean, Near Eastern views onto white people who don't have them to begin with. Like I've interacted with so many white, like heritage American, old stock white Americans. They have no ethnic sensibilities at all. It's like they don't even get it.
This is the amazing thing. Like it's so common on the left to be like, America is the most racist country in the world with like the unique, and like they literally kind of believe that like America invented slavery. It's like literally this uniquely racist country. But to be honest, like so many white Americans, like it's such a non-clannish society. I mean, this is literally
that's very true. Yeah,
like literally the psychological term of weird. You know, like it's literally the weird mindset. It's so unique in world history and world civilization. Like
absolutely,
literally the thing that you mentioned at the start of the podcast, like, you know, in a family dispute, they will go to the police to adjudicate it. Like that's almost unimaginable. Like the non-clannishness of Anglo society.
No, absolutely. Yeah. They have they don't have race. I mean, again, there's white ethnics, there's people who don't fall into this. And I'll say that America is a country of extremes where you can find the most racist people on earth probably live in America. And the most non-racist and anti-racist people also live in America, so to speak, right? The most nuts religious people, Orthodox Jews and Amish and all that live here. And also the most anti-religious people. You find everything, right? But on the whole, America as this, I tweeted this once. It was like, Ibram Kendi makes like $25,000 to give a 1-hour Zoom call or something like that. And I said, only American whites are doing this, are so masochistic and anti-racist as to even allow such an industry to grifter to exist, right? You go to Greece and say, we're going to teach you how to be not racist. They'll be like, get out of my face.
I know. It's so amazing. There was, I forget the name of this lady, but she was like one of the she was like an Ibrahim Kendi type. And she was, they were having like dinner parties with really wealthy,
like $5,000 or something like that.
And it's actually just like insane. To be honest, I actually think there's now a backlash against like
it's done.
The masochism that existed for like 3-4 years was actually like disgusting. It actually got bad that like I think there now is a backlash. But it's just incredible. Like imagine going to like, I don't know, like China and then just expecting like wealthy, like imagine this, right? Imagine a Uyghur intellectual in China was trying
impossible.
to I know, like hosting dinner parties where like Han, like really wealthy Han elite
explain to them, how they feel being Muslim. You make me feel so bad because I'm not a Han Chinese person. Think about how your Han-ness, it's so loud, your Chineseness. They wouldn't even, it's like, I know, even the most liberal Western societies, just like a little bit less liberal than us. So get out of the Nordics, that weird zone, go to like Italy. And you know, they'll be like, what are you talking about? You know, like if you tell them, oh, the Egyptians in Italy, they feel like they're not accepted, they'll be like, well, go back to Egypt, get out of my face. Who are you?
That's what
I had to be confronted with this because I was raised with these notions, and then I went to live in Iran as a teenager, and I saw my own family, and I was like, wait a minute, my family are good, decent people. How come they don't care about any of this stuff? How come they don't have racial sensitivities? And I realized, oh wait, it's just a weird country thing. It's not a thing in Iran or in Afghanistan or Turkey.
It really is a weird country thing. And I remember like during the peak of wokeness when I was like starting university and it was just like the leftism was kind of like stultifying. I remember like you actually felt like you had to like kind of like retrain your brain to be like as a white man, like I won't take up space, you know, like that sort of thing. Like that's how it felt for a while. I seriously felt like I felt like my balls were in a vice. That's I think why
it was sort of I remember I was in an Islamophobia class to fill a credit, and you can imagine the environment. Trump is elected. It's like 2018. Islamophobia class at University of Michigan, hyper liberal institution, taught by like a Cuban American woman. And someone asked a question saying, you know, I've just read and like, I know I don't believe this, but like people were saying it and I just need to know what to say to tell them they're wrong. But like some white supremacist on the internet was saying that like Islam is anti-Semitic. Like, I don't know what to say. And I was sitting in the class dressed like this. So even though there's like a lot of other Arabs and they knew me as a person who knew a lot about Islam. So like the eyes like slowly drifted to me and the professor didn't even have to like say anything. Like it was understood that I would just like speak for Islam. I told them that like, yes, there is anti-Semitism in the Islamic textual heritage. And everyone was like, they were arrested. They didn't know what to do because they're like, well, he said it, but I don't want to believe it. I'm like, what do I do? Like, this is so ridiculous. Like, oh man,
this is kind of what I want to ask, and this is probably why I love your Twitter so much, because like you're capable of like self-criticism. You're capable of saying like this aspect of, say, like Middle Eastern culture or Islamic culture is bad and it's wrong and it like should be changed. But like it's like I guess it's kind of like a naive Western white liberal type thing where it's all cultural relativism. It's like you can't criticize another cultural practice because then you're racist. I think that's what it is. And like
that's a big problem. It's a big problem.
It really is. It really is. And then that's why I think like you get people in the way, like you get Britain where like you've literally got Hizb ut-Tahrir were like really active for so long. They recently got so active for so long, and they literally would have.
I mean, they had like ISIS. They were just recruiting for ISIS openly. If you watch the documentary, The Jihadi Next Door, it was just like a guy who's a bus driver in London in the day at night, and during the day he's just like, "Hey mate, you want to join ISIS, mate? Pamphlet for ISIS, mate." Like just walking around just casually.
It's mental, and like they would just do parades during the street. They'd have parades on the street, and they'd literally hold signs like "Kill the Queen," "Kill all British police." And it's like,
I know, Sharia for UK and all this ridiculous stuff.
And it's like,
I know what you mean.
And the crazy thing is, I actually think it's those are the guys who actually produce Islamophobia, because like people see that and it's like,
absolutely, I agree with you completely. But then, so I think this goes to also just the thing we want to talk about, the demoralization, where if you're told everything's the same and all cultures are just as equal as yours and you're awful for being a white Westerner, then they stop believing in themselves. If all cultures are the same, why should they assimilate into our culture? Well, maybe actually even ours is the inferior one. Maybe theirs is the superior culture. Look, they're brown. They're ethnic. They didn't colonize the world, so they know more than us. Maybe we should assimilate into them. You see like some white Britons in these northern towns that are just like full of Middle Easterners and Muslims now, where they like become Muslim and they like start doing it like this act of being like Al-Brittani, and they wear like a stupid thobe and they try to be like. Are you talking about the British Revert? Yeah, the British Revert. See, I mean, look, God bless their hearts. Anyone who joins Islam, I'll two hands embrace them and welcome to the faith. But there is some element of like, some people have just they're lost in the sauce, right? And a lot of converts even find that type of thing cringy, right? You change your name and you're wearing all these clothes, but it just goes to this lack of confidence. Some of them become Marxists, some of them become Muslim, some of them become this or that, but it's just lack of confidence in mainstream liberal Western culture. That's what you can't be that. That's cringe. To be that is cringe, right? So you got to be something else.
Well, that's the role I'm trying to fill here, because I'm like, I look around here, man, and it's like, it actually is so unpopular.
I know, it's sad. It's unfortunate.
And it's like, this is the thing, right? Like, this is the culture that I grew up on. Like, this is what I want to protect, because it's like, I want to live in a society. The thing I admire about America is the fact that like you guys can have the Amish, and also alongside that, like,
you're right, it's very cool.
Have like the most, like, this incredible like mix. That's what I like. That's what I honestly like. I think the biggest problem is like, and I think you've talked about this, and this is actually like a really, really tough problem for multiculturalism. And I think this is the problem that like the Western left is impaling itself on. They're like actually committing suicide on this issue, especially in Europe. And it's just such a disaster. Basically, like, how to explain this? I think the fact is, like, we've got the psychology, the mindset of weird societies, you know, like the mindset of like, you know, Northwestern European, and sort of like Anglo-Americans, which is like very non-clannish, very much based on the individual. There's no sense of sort of like tribalism, race, like it's really uncouth to think about things in terms of race and tribe, etc. And I think the problem is when you have migrants from, say, like the most conservative and rural poor parts of Pakistan, and these guys literally have the same values as like basically the Taliban, and they're going to like post-industrial, really poor parts of England. Like, that is obviously just like such a
disaster. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Only a weird person could not realize that that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So I've actually had sort of, it's crazy because like I think I only really started to break out of this like sort of mental prison like maybe a year and a half ago, sort of thing. And it probably was with October 7. Obviously, like the whole Israel-Palestine conflict is very complex, etc. And people typecast me as a Zionist. Putting all that to one side, I think it was just more the fact that like I was so shocked by sort of open extremist rallies in the West, where like you had the sort of Hizb ut-Tahrir guys. Like in London, they had like they had signs basically saying like, we call for an army to like march on Jerusalem and stuff like that. You had open celebrations of October 7 in the West, all this sort of stuff. And that was probably like what made me go, huh, this is a little bit like something's going on here, you know? And I think I sort of started to break out of that mental prison. And I started recently talking about the grooming gang scandal in Northern England, which is obvious. The reality is like, you know, at the end of the day, I still identify as sort of like a Western progressive liberal. But the reality is, I think it's basically like a Chernobyl type disaster for multiculturalism in the West.
Yeah, I believe it.
And I had these long debates and discussions with some of my friends that are even more progressive than me and liberal and everything. And they had the full WASP mindset where they like, it's just like this knee jerk reaction where they're like, well, why are you saying that it's like, why would you say that, like, you know, this one group is behind crimes, for example, etc.
I know it's unfortunate.
It's just, you can't even have a conversation about it. And I said, like, we were talking and there was one point where I was like, clearly it's just so socially destructive if you have like rape gangs that are operating, and some of the ringleaders of these rape gangs in Northern England, like in court, they had like these outbursts in court where they like literally made claims of racial superiority. So they were saying like, there was one of the I think it was one of the ringleaders in Rochdale who literally like said in the court, like, we are the superior race. The white girls are all sluts who are trained to be good at sex. Like, really disgusting stuff, right? And I was talking to my friends about this, and I was basically saying like, clearly, like, that's a disaster. Like, clearly that is just socially destructive. And they were like, well, why is it worse if an immigrant rapes someone than versus a native person rapes someone? I'm like, can't you fucking see? Like it's like, if somebody is saying, like, if somebody's doing a rape, if someone's operating a rape gang and they're literally doing it for ideological reasons, like, this is what this is what the ringleaders were basically saying. Like, they were saying in court, we believe we're superior, the white girls are all sluts, sort of thing. Clearly, like, that's such a disaster. And you can't just go, oh, well, one rape. Like, they were going, oh, why? So, Drew, you think that some rapes are worse than other rapes? What about the victims? Don't they think all rapes are bad? I'm like,
yeah, this is dance around. Yeah,
I just couldn't even understand them, the way they were looking at this issue.
You know, I'd say, I think you think about this way because you have the non-Anglo background, just like me.
Probably.
Where even though we were raised in this society, you were raised with uncles and families and cousins and gatherings where there's some of that old world Mediterranean mindset seeps in, and you can zoom out and see things from the perspective of, not to say you're even in any way similar to them, but like the perspective of the rapist, which is like the old world where ethnicity matters and people care about ethnicity. You know, we don't like the Turks and the Turks don't like us. So you kind of get these things, right? Westerners have been trained.
I did know all these Greeks, like, growing up, who'd be like, Turkey is the great enemy.
There you go. So you at least you grew up with it around you.
And the funny thing is, I actually always hated that. And like, obviously, I really dislike the Turkish government, Erdogan, etc. But like, I always hated that sort of mindset where it's like the Turks are like the old enemy. Because I was like,
we should pass these things off. I agree. Yeah, we're in a new. I agree completely. In any case, and we might find, by the way, that these groups we supposedly hate, we might end up having more in common with them. You know, we see Indians marrying Pakistanis, Turks marrying Greeks, Iranians marrying Iraqis abroad, because ultimately, come down to brass tacks, you have more in common than you don't. In any case, I think the issue is that Westerners, they don't like to admit that there are racial or ethnic components to crimes. And it's the worst thing for a Westerner is to get them to admit that a race that they're like, I can't be racist. I can't be racist. I can't be racist. It's even tread close to that. Like, even if you say an obvious statement in the context of American culture, like, for example, there are more Hispanic males trafficking drugs than Indonesian males, or there are more Muslim terrorists living in America, ideologically terrorists, they believe in these things. Then there are Amish terrorists, or more black males are engaged in criminal activity in Detroit, where I happen to be visiting now, than Dutch grandmothers. Like, the most, make it as ludicrous as possible, and they'll still, I don't know, that's like, you shouldn't say that, like, you know. So it's like, the problem is they just can't accept that cultures are different. They have different mindsets. They believe different things, and it's just the poor things. They don't know how to engage with it, because the second you do, you're a Nazi. So Sam Hyde made a video addressed to Elon Musk about the H-1B thing.
I didn't actually watch that, but
yeah. And he said, and I don't even know who he is. Maybe he might actually be a far right person, but he made a point.
I think he is,
where he said basically that, and I agree with this point specifically, that humans are not just empty tabula rasa, interchangeable economic units. People come with baggage and beliefs and culture and ideas and all of these things, right? People are the product of their ancestry and culture. So you can't just interchange an Indian guy with an H-1B visa with an American one with no cultural ramifications or context, like as if they're just two blank slates, right? And then just for saying that, I think Hassan Piker, one of these guys, called him a Nazi, basically saying like, if you believe that humans aren't blank, that you're a Nazi, right? So they don't want to admit that, people coming from cultures where sexual violence was real in living history,
It's
where
really, it's still really bad.
They're different. There's gonna be, look, if there's 1 million Pakistanis in Britain, if even only 100 or 1,000 of them believe in inflicting sexual violence against white women to assuage their inferiority complex, that is like you said, a Chernobyl level.
Yeah,
we
Chernobyl,
only need 10 Muslim terrorists in 10 years. Imagine if in America every year on January 1st, a Muslim terrorist did a Pulse nightclub and did a Boston bombing. I would be scared for my safety. Only 10 and 10, only 10, one a year, one out of 3. But
literally this. It's just also like a failure to understand cause and effect, right? Like obviously there were these race riots in Britain over the summer, and there were lots of like disgusting people that were involved in that shit. People who just did looting. Obviously, obviously I hate looting. I hate rioting. Like, police have to crack down. I believe in law and order, but like people just acted like it came out of nowhere. But it actually was a response to like a terrorist guy who like went and just stabbed like 3 young girls at like a dance studio.
Right, I remember that. Yeah. Well, MLK said the riot is the language of the unheard or something, or the shout of the unheard. Right. I mean,
that was actually a bad statement. That was a really bad statement when he said that, because like obviously like liberals used that so much during Black Lives Matter when there was rioting.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately that led to this huge backlash where like now that's probably why Trump is now the president, Like,
it might very well be true. I mean, the problem is you live in a Commonwealth country, so you're more cued in. But as an American, it's such an anti-caste society. I just can't understand how class works in the UK. And this is why I commented and then I retracted when I realized this, because I realized I didn't fully understand it. But basically, the British authorities and government aren't looking into it because these are like chavs, or I apologize if that's like a really bad word, but that's what I've heard. That's what my British friends said. They're chavs, they're trashy whites.
That's literally it.
It's more about class than anything, apparently, is what has been relayed to me.
That's a huge part of it, and it like literally is probably almost just as much of a part of it as like the sort of race/religion element, because like a lot of the young girls who were victimized were stereotyped. Like, you literally had police officers who said like, these are all slags, like these are like these are like really disgusting language, and they were like the white urban poor, and they were looked on like in Australia we call people like that bogans. In Britain it's chavs. In America I guess it's kind of like hillbillies, the stereotype.
Right.
And that actually informed a lot of it. And you're right, Britain is a way more stratified society in terms of
I didn't realize that.
America or Australia. I think this is part of the disaster, right? Like, Australia and America, in some sense, have always been migrant societies.
It's very true.
Like always. And there's a lot more social mobility. It's complex, because some people argue that America is way less socially mobile these days because of inequality. But
there has been historically.
And even just the culture celebrates stories of social mobility so much.
Sure, our heroes. I mean, look at Trump, for God's sake. Look at J.D. Vance.
Literally, and so. Yeah, it's interesting. Like for example, would someone like JD Vance be able to rise to a position of being?
I don't think so.
Probably not. Like literally, probably not. That's the interesting thing. And so, like, actually, certainly not. And so, I think this is part of the problem, right? Like, Britain is a way more stratified society. It also has like a coherent 1,000-year history as its own like literal nation.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, like. There is such a thing as the English people. There is such a thing as Britain as a country.
Oh, don't say that. You'll be a Nazi. You're a Nazi now.
I know. Well, look, this is one thing that pisses me off, right? Like I remember it was like in response to like the Southport, like the rioting took place because like a young migrant guy who had reverted stabbed 3 young girls to death. Like, just the sickest. Like, it's such a sick
just messed up. Yeah, so messed
Obviously messed up. And the rioting takes place, etc. And some people, you had the standard commentary where some people said like, we just don't want people who don't, assimilate into our culture. And then you'd sometimes see this sort of like white liberal reaction where it's like, well, what British culture? Like beans on toast? Like, we've got no culture.
My God. These people are so insufferable.
Exactly. It's actually insufferable. And that level of self-hatred and masochism, and it's so diluted and out of touch. And, this is part of the problem. Like, it was the white ethnic, it was the white urban class that was really poor, that were like, predominantly the victims of those grooming gangs. It's what led to like that's why Tommy Robinson exists, because, and it's also probably why Tommy Robinson is such I mean, he's like literally a criminal. Like he's committed even before he became a political activist.
He's a
committed
football
these,
hooligan type. We know
like
what type of
literally,
person he is.
yeah, he literally was like he basically was that type of guy even before he became a political activist, right? And that's why the British, it's like from the outside, it looks like the British political and social like elite were basically like, oh, the grooming gangs is sort of Tommy Robinson chav issue. It's for like this kind of like xenophobic. It's for like the white urban poor, and they're all xenophobic. They hate different people. They're like, and so it becomes like kind of like a class or social marker that like if you're xenophobic, you're or if you care about these issues, you're lower than. And I think that's part of the problem. And it's also like the fact that Britain just has this. Britain's wasn't a migrate. It wasn't like Britain has its own coherent 1,000-year history. It has there is an English people. Like it's I kind of hate this narrative that like you know how literally the definition of indigenous kind of in like social studies is you're only indigenous if you've been colonized. Like that's literally like the kind of standard definition.
Or if you're like a lovable noble savage, if you're native looking or brown or you have some primitive lifestyle, then you're indigenous, right? Yeah.
But basically it's like I'm pretty sure like the standard kind of understanding of indigeneity in kind of like social studies, like the intelligentsia, is that it's an identity that's constructed in relation to being colonized. So therefore like therefore English couldn't be indigenous to England. Therefore like I don't know, like Persians.
No, they were colonized successively. The Romans and then the Normans. Yeah. Well, even going farther back, the Jutes and the Angles and the Saracens. 5 layers of. No, another thing is we don't understand their society. Americans just think any British accent is fancy, right? I teach dozens of Brits. I can tell a posh London accent from a northern working class accent. I can tell Tommy Robinson and the Tate brothers sound like bumpkins and what Bro, they're all from the council estates. They're all from the same poor post-war deindustrialized, destroyed poverty cycle society. Americans are fully unaware of what they just think Britain is Hogwarts and those red telephone boxes and Westminster Abbey and the Big Ben and crumpets and tea. They don't understand these intricacies of British culture at all.
And I think the British political class, like they've been very Americanized. And I think basically their approach to multiculturalism and like sort of like intercommunity relations was almost like trying to import kind of Americanized understanding of like culture.
And it won't work there. It won't work.
I think it just doesn't work in the sense that like it's there's no like one of the big reasons why there's a lot of social tension, like there's no economic growth in Britain for 20 years. Like
that's a big part of it.
Yeah. It's like it's a society that's not economically doing well. It's been in decline for a while, probably. There's got massive problems with like NIMBYism, degrowth ideology. It's also a very stratified class society. And then there's also like just this like coherent 1,000-year history where it basically was an ethno-state. And so obviously it's going to be like a combustible social mix.
No, it's terrible, terrible. Well, here's a couple things why America does so well. I actually had to explain this to a group of
America does so much better in terms of Muslim integration.
Well, I'll tell you why. A group of French researchers came to U of M to talk to. I guess we were hand selected as like Muslims who are well integrated in society. I was in the student government. So I sat with a group and we drove them around Dearborn and we showed them. And I said, look, America is very rich. So wealth helps everything. Nothing is hurt by money. And it's very big, a lot of room to go around. And there's no great sense of who belongs to anywhere. But even with all that, look at our little Italies. Luigi Mangione wanted to talk about. He's not the first Italian guy to shoot someone over business in New York, right?
True.
Each other over in the thousands in the mafia. But you know what got rid of the mafia? America was rich. Italians realized, wait a minute, a better way to make money is a legal way, right? And they had room. They could move around. So we didn't end with a permanent underclass of Italians, which they were. The way that Muslims are the underclass, now the Italians were. But they graduated because there was money. But the problem is
that's true.
There's nowhere for these chavs and these Pakistanis to graduate economically and get out of these messed up situations.
It's such a bad situation. And like, isn't it interesting that both the Tate brothers and Tommy Robinson both come from Luton? Like,
they're products of the same messed up. We should have, I mean, obviously, if they do terrible things, they deserve condemnation. But on a human level, right, outside of society, in our hearts, we should feel bad for these people more than anything, that they grew up in such a messed up, destroyed. I mean, Tommy Robinson said my cousin was raped, and Tate said I grew up and I got stabbed and this and that thing. I mean, just imagine growing up in that type of messed up, terrible society. And also, what's worse,
shitholes.
knowing what was better was what came before you was better. And that's even salt in the wounds that your grandparents lived a better life than you. That
Yeah.
even makes it worse. So
This is the problem, right? Like, I'm trying to track this path where, like, I'm still a progressive, I'm still a Western liberal, but I'm trying to respond to the actual conditions on the ground. And like, I can see, like, Germany, AFD's rising to power. You see, obviously, far right also gaining influence in Britain. You see far right gaining influence, like, across all these different Western societies. And you've got this one example where there's a country of Denmark, and I'm not that familiar with it, but my understanding of it is basically that the center left, the Social Democrats in Denmark, they basically kind of cracked down on illegal immigration. They greatly reduced, sort of migrant numbers. They made a really big they put a really big emphasis on assimilation, integration, etc. And in 2015, the far right in Denmark had 22% of the vote. In 2022, the last election, it was like 2% of the vote. So the far right, like, actually was basically completely sidelined.
yeah.
And so I guess as a pragmatic sort of progressive person, I'm like, listen, if like having a completely open southern border is going to elect Trump, just fucking close the border. Like, that's how I sort of see it.
No, I mean, look, if people see, look, I'm not saying if it's real or not, but if their perception is that their country is being abused with open immigration, and that their culture is not being respected, and that they're being spit on and disrespected, and their, God forbid, daughters are getting raped, they're going to say, okay, who can address my problems? And again, Westerners generally are temperamentally liberal and left-leaning. But if no one on the left is not just not addressing, it would be one thing if they said, oh, I'm not going to address this, it's too uncomfortable. Deny it. Say, no, it's not happening. You're a liar. You're a racist, XYZ. Then what are they going to do? They're going to go to the side that will hear them out. So a lot of people who were liberals vote for Trump because, like you said, if the border's open for 4 years, and look, I live in New York, you go out in the streets, the hotels are $400 or $300 a night because they're full of migrants, subways full of migrants, crime is happening every day in the street. A lot of New Yorkers became Republicans for the first time. So if the liberals, I mean, the Democrats are joking, America, they're completely cooked at this point. But they shouldn't lose people to Trump in New York City, for God's sake. New Yorkers didn't like Trump; they hated him. They thought it was a joke.
It's crazy. Anyway. I think it's just that like low level crime and disorder. Like there's just this. It started after around like 2020. Like liberals just really started exalting like criminality and like I know
it's so messed up. It's so messed up.
What do you think explains that? Like, what is it?
It's just weird. They just have this mind virus where they think they just need to always feel bad for everyone. Like, no, someone who's stealing $998 of makeup from CVS, so it's not a felony, not $2 more, is not to be felt. No one's stealing loaves of bread. These people are just terrible members of society who coerce in everything and make it worse. Like, every time I pay, and another problem is, everywhere you go, you're disincentivized from participating in society. So I have to do a job tomorrow after, I go to bed tonight. And I wake up thinking, oh, wow, idiots who got into Trump's shitcoin became multimillionaires and I have to go to a job. And then when I swipe on the subway and 10 Hispanic migrants or, local people or whatever after me jump the thing, and then I swipe, and then before me, 2 Muslim guys who look like me jump the thing, I think, wait, why am I the idiot paying for this thing? And like everywhere you turn, society people are cheating the system. And I start to feel like, what the heck? This is not fair. Why am I getting disincentivized from playing fairly? Like, I'm trying to be a good citizen here. And I'm getting disincentivized.
That sounds like the Soviets in the 80s, man. Like just everybody no one believes in like the society anymore. Everybody cheating. I think
so, yeah.
That's such a
it's just both. It's like if the president of the country, on the day he's getting inaugurated, does a crypto rug pull, scams like $30 billion. If the president is a scammer, then the whole country is a scam. Everywhere you turn, there's ads for weeds in casinos, and everywhere on TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, there's OnlyFans models. Like, everything in the society is just selling you sex and drugs and scams. And it's just start to feel like everything is crap. Like, again, I see it like living in New York. Every day, it's just like they're selling sex. The drugs is being sold openly. Like, everyone's just showing up from everywhere, and I don't know who they are. And someone with a wife walking around in New York who comes home from a job and it's dark in winter. Like, I'm afraid. I don't know. There's people getting burned and shoved in the subway tracks. And my wife takes the subway home every day. Are you okay? What's up?
Oh, you've got a family? Like, you've got
I'm married. So it's like,
oh,
I'm
congratulations.
Like, okay, and like waiting. Thank you. It's like waiting for her to come home and like, okay, you're good. Or I text her, are you leaving work?
Man. Oh my God, I'd be terrified. Dude, this is a real story that happened to my mom. So she went to, like, it's funny because my mom's like actually quite MAGA and everything, but she went to America and she went to NYC, and this
Mhm.
was only like 6 months ago, and she was in Wall Street, and like I kid you not, this is literally what happened. Like a black homeless guy like jumped out and he had his like dick out and like started
Oh my
like
God. Oh, I'm
masturbating.
so sorry to
Like
hear
that,
that, man.
like that happened to my mom, and I think that's kind of like the problem. Like, there's just like this
Yeah.
like constant sort of like low level tolerance of just like, I don't know. You see the videos of like the homeless guys in New York City, like just like burning people alive and stuff like that.
It's
Like
just the
it
worst.
can't go
Yeah.
on.
So,
It just
no,
can't
I
go
mean,
on.
so I'm not currently in New York. I'm visiting Detroit. My last
Yeah.
experience before I got on the train to go to the airport from where I live, which is in upper Western Manhattan, the guy and like, and I had to switch a train. So I went towards like a more wealthier. So I was in like an ostensibly wealthy area. And there
Yeah.
was a guy laying on the platform of the ground, just screaming, rolling around. And I'm like, this is such a fitting last moment in the city for me, that this is my goodbye. A guy laying on the, so it's like the
Yeah.
bottom 0.01% of society, because let's say we have like
Yeah.
10 million people in New York every day.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet like 1,000 of them, because it's not like every day, right? 1,000
Yeah.
of
Of
them
course.
are pooping in the street,
It's like
sexually
1,000 people.
assaulting.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
We're unwilling to get rid of this 1,000 people, right?
Yeah.
So that the other 8 or 9 million can live peacefully. Like, I talk to liberal New Yorkers every
Crazy.
day, my family members,
Yeah.
who they're getting radicalized. Like, I talk to
Yeah.
people who say, you know what, we had insane asylums, and these stupid libertarians came and said, you can't put people in insane asylums, it's against
Yeah.
personal freedom. And then we open the insane asylums, and guess what? Instead of having one insane asylum, it used to be upstate. It used to be upstate New York. The
Yeah.
subways are the insane asylum. So literally every subway ride now, I see multiple clearly mentally unwell people, and my
Yeah.
own family members. Like, my dad got on the train, he sat in the train, and across from him sat a person who was clearly unwell and started saying, you can leave this effing country, you can leave, if you don't like it, you can get out of this country, you can, like, you know, like having
To
like
your
a
dad.
meltdown. Yeah, to my dad. And he's visiting the
Yeah.
city for the first time, like, hey dad, I moved to New York, you should come see New York. And he had the
Wow.
worst experience. He like talked back to the person, the
Yeah.
person started, we had to leave the train, and I had to explain, you can't talk to anyone here, and you got to be careful. And it's like I've had several interactions where clearly deranged people, in just 3 months of living, I've only lived in Europe for 3 months, I've had like 5 interactions where deranged people came up to me. One of them had like blood dripping from her face, and had like a huge black eye, walking barefoot in the winter, and started screaming, getting up in my face about how I'm evil and how my religion is demonic. And it was funny. This is so New York. A Jehovah's Witness or something was trying to get me to join their religion. And the second that started, even though he believes in God, he's so believing, he started sprinting, just running with his books.
My God.
And I was like, what's going on? And then 2 minutes later, 2 of the chess hustlers started screaming at each other. And one was screaming about how you're a pedophile and how you're touching children. It's like, I was just like, I was almost like regretting my decision. I'm like, where do I live? Like, what is this a place where I, like, even though my wife is in New York, she's from there, so she's like totally normal for her. I'm like, even for her, I'm like, do you realize like this isn't okay? Like, are you okay? Do you want me to like remove you from this? We can like move to Istanbul or something. You don't have to live.
Gee, it's crazy, man.
It's
This
just
is like
months. I can talk. I can keep going, by the way. But anyway,
I think this is like literally why Trump won.
No, absolutely. Because again, liberal New Yorkers, like I'm talking, like I have, because of my job, I have like a big network of people who come to my events and I meet. So I became friends with a gentleman, classic liberal New Yorker, Ivy League educated, high level job, donates big sums to the Democratic Party over Israel, Palestine, and this security issue, didn't vote in this election, didn't vote for Trump, for sure, can't do that, but didn't vote. And slowly I become his personal friend. He's saying like, you know, this is getting ridiculous.
Was he like pro-Palestine or pro-Israel?
He used to just be like a mild Israel critic, but now it's like it's almost like he's pro. I mean, this guy lives in like a wealthy area, and the building next to him, like there was like some migrant related murder in the building next to him, like some migrant shot or like stabbed someone to death, and he lives in like a wealthy area. And he was telling me that a homeless man twice broke into his building, masturbated in like the lobby area or the elevator, and then stole packages and left. And then he called the police and trying to like coerce the guy to stay. And the police came and let the guy go.
Oh, that's so bad.
Yeah. That's where law and order in New York, dude, it's getting like Brazil level. Like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
genuinely feel more personally afraid on a day-to-day level in New York than I did in Tehran. And Tehran's like genuinely has safety issues. Like it's a poor
yeah,
country. There's thievery, there's instability at times. I lived in Amman, I lived in Tehran, I lived briefly in
yeah.
Cairo. I lived all over the third world. And New York really takes the cake in terms of just
That's
pure
amazing.
disorder and chaos. And the
That's
locals, they
amazing.
think like, oh yeah, we're like tough. Like they try to cope. They're like we're tough.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's normal for us. Like you're a transplant. Like it's not. We're used to it. Like we're really tough. Oh my god, you stupid transplants. You're so wimpy. Just like deal with it,
yeah.
dude. Just look the other way. I'm like,
Oh, that shit's
actually,
so dumb.
I'm like, we before we moved years ago, we were visiting and we lived in my wife's aunt's apartment in Midtown for a month. And it's like every night in the subway station next to her apartment, and one of the like Billionaires Row, one of the richest
Yeah,
areas of the city. No, her aunt's not a billionaire, but she just has this apartment from
yeah.
decades ago. And in any case, we would see like people just using heroin in the subway station. And I'm
Crazy.
like, what is this city? Like, can't something be done about this? Like, can't a cop just come and be like, sorry, you can't have like passed out with your heroin needle? My friend, his building lobby is taken over. And he's a liberal, by the way. He's a liberal.
Yeah, yeah,
Everything I just said, he probably would disagree with some of it. His building
yeah.
lobby has been like invaded by drug addicts, basically. Like every New
So
Yorker
bad.
has stories to this effect. It's like it's insane. It's unsustainable.
It's so bad. It's so bad. Like, have you seen those people on Twitter? And it's like this. It's like they're really like a rearguard action at this point. Like the vibe shift is so real, and they're like the last Japanese soldiers like holding out on the islands, like 30 years up. But you know the socials and like their response to somebody like just smoking meth on like the subway
Yeah,
and
like
just like
just deal with it.
like yeah, just look
Move.
the other way. It's like holy fuck,
No,
man!
this
Like
isn't. Dude, for me, like I
mental.
talked to my wife, I said, you know, man, we live in New York and all, and I love your city, but if this doesn't improve, if this doesn't trend in the right direction, we might not be able to have a family, like to raise kids one day here. I don't think that can
Yeah,
happen here. Like, just sad as that is, I just
that is
cannot
insane.
live in a society where my kids are just going to be like literally. My wife has seen people pooping, people having sex, people like manic people muttering with a knife, like insane fights. Like you'll just see clearly deranged people
So
screaming in the street, like everywhere you go, like setting things on fire, just like eating food from the trash, manic episodes. Like you just every public space in New York is ruined by the presence of these people
why do the Democrats tolerate this? Like, what
because
do
they
you think
just
it is?
can't bring themselves to be right wing or
Yeah,
fascist or anti-freedom, because to
yeah,
lock people up in an insane asylum is fascist. To tell
yeah,
migrants, hey, you know, you can do everything in your own way, just like don't be criminal, is fascist. It's like it's just getting and people like the Young Turks were the most cringe doctrinaire
yeah,
progressives.
yeah,
And they've just fully pivoted to being right wing. And
yeah.
experiences like Elon Musk claims, I don't know if it's true or not, that he was radicalized by his son or daughter, one of them becoming
Oh,
trans,
the
right?
sun transitioning.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Anna Kasparian was radicalized by being like nearly raped. I just hate to even talk about it. It's so
Oh,
vile,
yeah.
by a homeless man in Los Angeles. It's
So
like
bad.
the rubber hits the road when you have skin in the game, when you're almost raped,
Exactly.
when
Yeah.
when X and Y and Z happens, you know, you just start like, what the fuck am I thinking? I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah. You can't. You
what?
can't have
You know?
you can't have luxury beliefs at that point. It's just
Exactly. It's like I used to hold luxury beliefs regarding
me too. Yeah, me
the
too.
homeless before I moved to
Yeah.
New York, because I lived in Michigan. There's not that many homeless people here. I like poor
Yeah.
people. You see them here
Yeah.
like freezing in the street in the winter, like, oh my God.
Yeah. You feel
And then I
bad,
went
of
to New
course.
York and I'm like, there's only so many episodes where homeless people, who, by the way, were white and black, the two episodes,
Yeah. Yeah.
are like racially abusing and threatening the life of your family before you're like, actually, I'm done with my sympathy for the homeless at this
Yeah.
point.
Literally.
Sorry, I'm just done. I just have lost it at this point.
This is a funny example. Like Sam Harris, he had like a Substack where he was talking about the LA arson fires or whatever. He was talking about the LA fires. I think he might have even lost his home in the fires, and he was talking
Yeah.
about like the arsonists. Like there were guys
Oh
who
my
were
God.
in the chaos. Yeah, like
There's some
literally.
are saying that the fires were just all arsonists, that they were arsonists and the wind just spread the arson.
It seems like that was a big part of it. And Sam Harris was like, in the face of like arsonists during a massive natural disaster, like starting more fires, in the face of that, like you fantasize about police death squads. And obviously he was using hyperbole. Like he obviously is kind
Yeah.
of joking about that, but he is kind of just like making a point that like obviously you become a lot harder. And I remember like Nathan J. Robinson, who runs that cringe like current affairs,
Yeah,
who dresses as a daddy. He retweeted and was like, it just shows how fascist America is becoming. That, you know, Sam Harris can want police death squad so easily, and it's like, dude, like he's talking about people setting arsons, like doing arson in the middle of
I
a
know.
massive
It's just
disaster.
like,
What the fuck's wrong with you?
well,
I
it's
don't know.
look, it's at their own peril, and it really saddens
Yeah.
me because my ideal America is like Bill Clinton's America, where there's reasoned, sane, kind of liberal-ish America. Because look, America's never going to be Islamic. Let's just be real. America's never going to be anything resembling what I am. So might as well just be like a sane, moored, you know, level-headed liberal who's center left, right? My ideal is that. But the reason I feel like I have to respond so strongly to the far left is because they will make it so that we'll have the far right. Lindy Man tweeted this. He said, you spent 10 years talking about DEI and racism, and now you reinvigorated white nationalism again. So great. Congratulations. Now we have white nationalism as a mainstream.
That was Lindy Man who said that.
Force.
Hey.
Yeah, he tweeted that today. It's like, congrats. Now you have white. Right. It's like, thanks. This is where you got us. I don't want to be that. They look at my tweets and they're like, oh, look at this far right guy. I'm like, no, dude, I want us to be center left. But because you're insane, you're going to push us to be far right. You're the far right. You're the catalyst for it.
This is the funny thing. I think both of us are basically like normal, moderate, sort of center left people who just want a normal society. And then we just like look at like people like smoking meth on the subway and we're like,
I know, it's insane.
That's crazy.
You know what it is? A lot of these people, they're single. They don't have any aspirations for like marriage and children in a community.
Nihilist.
I remember like when I was a single man and I would travel and live in all these countries, I didn't care. I didn't have any concerns. I never thought about safety. It's like you have a woman in your life and then also kids in the future. It's like you really start to worry. So it's like for them, someone's smoking crack. I don't care. But for me, it's like, I don't want my child exposed to that. I don't want this to be their reality. So it really is something about skin in the game where if you don't have,
I fully understand,
you know, so
it tracks with me too. Cause like I've been with same girl for like 3 years now. And like, you know, starting to think about family and everything. And it's the same thing, man. It's literally the same thing. Like you start to think like, hang on, like I'll tell you a story. Like, cause this is funny. It's kind of like a universal problem with the left, right? Cause like we're talking about all this, like basically retarded, like sort of leftist tolerance for crime in America, but it's the same in Australia. So, you know, I live in the state of Queensland, and there's been just like a wave of like midnight machete home robberies.
Oh my god!
Yeah, it's crazy. Like it's actually mental, right? Like people, like gangs of youths breaking into people's homes. And they've got machetes and like they're stealing things. Some people have been killed. Some people have been stabbed.
That's worse than a gun almost. I feel like I'd rather just be shot to death than killed with a machete. Wow. Oh my god.
It's a scary thing because we don't really have guns in Australia, which probably like, I mean, we don't have gun deaths, but like, yeah, people have machetes. And here's another one, right? This was in a sort of more, it's a poorer part of the sort of like southeast Queensland, like Ipswich, which is, I guess, I don't know, maybe like the Bronx of like, I don't know, Brisbane sort of area.
Okay.
And there's just like this old white lady, this 63-year-old grandma who's stacking shelves in Woolworths, which is like, I don't know, like our kind of like main supermarket. And a guy, like this young 13-year-old guy, comes along with a machete that he like a machete
in
or
a
massive
supermarket.
Knife. Yeah, in a supermarket. I'm not sure if it was a machete. It was like a massive knife though that apparently he picked up within the shopping center off the shelf somewhere. He stole it from a shelf, came up, stabbed this old lady in the back so hard that it actually went through to the other side of her body.
Oh my god!
And she died immediately, and it's a 13-year-old guy. And the Australian Greens, who are like, because we have a kind of a bit more of a multi-party system here in Australia. So the Australian Greens are like, the Australian Greens are probably what the DSA, AOC types are like for you, and like their whole thing is, oh my god, we need to raise the age of criminal responsibility because 10 is too young. We're locking up children. This 13-year-old guy is just a child. It's like, dude, he just stabbed somebody to death with like a machete, basically.
Yeah. Why is there sympathy always with the criminals and not with the aggrieved, not with society, not with the law abider? I don't understand it at all.
It's like this weird sort of like antisocial element they have to it. And the home robberies that I was mentioning, they're all young people. It's all like gangs of like 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, even 12-year-olds. Like it's so what we know, it's known as the youth crime wave, basically.
Wow.
And we had a Labor government here, and we have states. The states have responsibility for crime. So the Labor, Social Democratic, Progressive government, they were struggling with this issue because the government knew that they were going to get absolutely massacred at the polls if they didn't do something about this. But at the same time, the sort of like left-wing activists within the party. So again, like the sort of AOC types were going like, you can't lock up kids. Like this is disgusting. This is human rights abuse. All this sort of stuff. And I remember like the previous premier, who like they literally they lost in a massive landslide. Like this happened 3-4 months ago. There was a massive landslide they lost basically because of this issue solely.
Oh wow.
And it was basically youth crime. That was the key issue. And this is the funny thing though, like so the Labour premier was perceived to be too weak on crime, like too lefty, too everything. But the young Labour kids, like the Labour left kids, they turned their backs on her at like a Labour event because they thought she was like a fascist on crime or whatever. And
because she wanted to lock the criminals up despite their young age or something like that.
So like the widespread view in society was that Labour was too weak on it. They did introduce some laws, but it was seen to be like not enough. And the Labour left kids, like the young commies, were like turning their backs on the premier, who was universally seen to be too weak on crime. They were saying like, she's too hard on crime.
And that she was too hard, even though she was weak. Oh my God, this is ridiculous. This is just the death of society, man. This is not good.
So this is why they lost in the end. And this is the funny thing, right? They ended up working out. It was like 150 young. It was crazy number. Where it's like literally like 150 or 200 young kids who were like mid-teens, like 13, 14, 15, that were responsible for like the vast majority of like the violent criminal offenses.
I remember reading stuff like this on Twitter where they said a vanishingly small number of people are, I think in one city, they discovered like 8 young men were responsible for like 80% of some like car break-ins. It's almost always like this. There's a joke in Iran where there was a town where there was very few break-ins. And what would happen is, so on the Eid, the Nowruz, so not Islamic Eid, but the Persian Eid, the Nowruz, 1 week of New Year celebrations, people will return to their hometowns or their villages. So during this week, the local police department would just imprison all the people who had been convicted before for breaking and entering preemptively, even though it violates Western notions of civil rights and due process. But then the city would have no break-ins that year, magically, right? So I'm not saying we should preemptively do this in Western societies, but this tiny, small percentage of criminals who coarsen life and make it intolerable. I, as an urbanist, I say this to other urbanists because they're almost 99% of them are very left-leaning. I say, look, as long as you don't tackle the urban crime issue, you're never going to make living in cities a palatable thing for Americans. They're always going to prefer suburbs. It's just the reality of the situation.
Gee, it's just crazy. It's like this anti-social element where they just like hate society. It's like they want to punish people. Like I don't understand, right? You can literally
it's masochism. It's because they don't have skin in the game. They don't have kids. There's a lot of self-hate. Most Westerners and white people have degrees of self-hatred, and in ways, it's like even the ones that they espouse supremacy. Even they also have internalized self-hatred. It's just baked into being white in a way nowadays in this modern era. I don't know. It's so many different brain viruses rotting their brains at once. And you get people like me who are coming from, I was raised in America, but mentally really formed by a different society in a fundamental way. And you just look at it and you're like, what is going on? You guys have lost it,
And this is the funny thing, like, because you're like sort of like Persian, because you're like, I don't know, like brown guy or whatever, like these leftist activists assume that you have to be like fully on board with like gay.
Yeah, of course I would be. I'm brown. Yeah, love them.
That's, in reality, like literally everywhere, like it was minorities that were going to Trump, and it's like because like the local Vietnamese guys, like I don't know, and like like the local Asian American community in San Francisco don't like just Asian grandmas getting like fucking stabbed to death in the street.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's a big one. I think one part of it is the more wide-eyed, naive ones just think that all brown people are liberal temperamentally and only evil whites are conservative. The more cynical ones, maybe they know deep down that we're not like them, but that we'll vote for them for the gives, give us this, give us that. But ultimately, yes, if I vote for Democrats every time, I mean, I don't vote in America anyway, but if I vote for Democrats every time, it will be more tolerable for me and I can get more visas and I can apply for social benefits. But sorry, I don't want to be self-interested. I want to support I have love for this society for taking my family in a hard moment in history. So I have love for them. Maybe you feel that way about Australia. I feel like I owe it to the society to advocate what's best for the whole society, not what's like they'll say, oh, but the Democrats won't have a Muslim ban. Trump will have a Muslim ban, blah. And I don't even like Trump, but it's like, yeah, but that shouldn't be my standard. It shouldn't just be me only. I should think about the society in some,
That's so interesting. And I think like in that way, you're like literally like a model migrant sort of thing. And even with me, but even with me, right? Like
in a way, yeah.
Like it's funny, right? Like because my family, like I like fully assimilated, right? Like I didn't even like when I grew up, me and my siblings like didn't want to learn Greek because like we wanted to assimilate. And it's actually kind of sad in a way. Like I probably went too far even. Like, my whole mindset was like, I want to be fully Australian. And like, to be honest, like it probably, I probably am almost like Anglified in my mental structure, right? Because like,
yeah, I in a way as well. Yeah.
yeah, that's the funny thing. Because like, realistically, I don't really think like I don't know. I see those Greek guys who are like the Turks are the old enemy, and like I actually like think that shit is so cringe, and it maybe it even influenced me. Like I don't know if you know much, but like I basically was like I dedicated like 3-4 years of my life advocating for Uyghurs who are like a Turkish people who are persecuted by the Chinese government. It's like I wanted to go so far the other way, and it's like I guess I became almost like sort of like Anglo type brain where it's like the weird psychology where like you really don't like clannishness, you really don't like tribalism and stuff like that. And it's funny because like I think both the far left and the far right would see both of us and kind of like have meltdowns because like the far left expect both of us to be like fully supportive of gay race communism because like like you're sort of migrants, you're like kind of like migrant guys, like you should be supporting like the full great replacement of society, blah blah blah. But then also like the far right guys, like they expect because I don't know, like because even though I'm like third generation by this point, but like they still sometimes I still get the guy going like we're going to deport you because you're part of
I get this all. The funniest thing to that deport me, it's like I'm the one of the few migrant origin
good
people.
Guy, you're great.
Who sympathize with and they want the society to improve. So I'll like say things like that. So, but you're still getting deported. Don't think you're accepted. It's like okay, fine. That's fine. I don't mind leaving. Like I'm not gonna die if I have to leave America. I've spent the last like 5 years living abroad. Essentially, I just moved back like 6 months ago. After 5 years, I left college and I lived abroad until 6 months ago. So it's fine, but it's just I don't know. I feel like it's almost Islamic in a way for me to want the best for the society. That Muslims should ideally be a positive contribution. So even if that means that I have to like put myself at social risk, and ultimately I am a person who writes and translates poetry. So you could say it's insane for me to even talk about any of these issues. You just stay away and just avoid offending anyone. But it's like, I feel that I have an Islamic duty to want the best for my society as a Muslim. And these people have done, they've done. It's like these people have done so much right by us. Like my dad moved here for education and a war started and his family relied on him to send money. So he stayed and I was raised here and I was made to feel at home. And yes, I faced racism, but the infrastructure of society was set up to address it. And I basically was met with kindness by almost all. I feel like you probably have these same experiences. So I feel like these people have been so nice and magnanimous to me. Why should I? Because I'm afraid that some liberals in New York who I'm rubbing shoulders with won't like me. It's like, no, I don't care what they think. I feel like I have this duty to this society to want what's best for it. And if that means I have a platform that I should advocate for some sanity, then fine, I'll do it. And if some people want to hate me and block me and make memes of me and call me a loser and Uncle Tom, so be it. I don't care. It's funny because I remember in like grade school, like really young, like I had a couple guys like pick on me going like, oh, Drew's a hairy wog or whatever. Cause like wog's like the kind of like slur for Greeks or whatever. But really? But then like once I became like, I don't know, like past a certain point, like, I don't know, it's funny because I recently started growing a beard. And after that, I actually started getting people calling me Arab and stuff like that. I literally got in an Uber and like a Somali driver was like, are you a Muslim brother? Are you Lebanese? And I was like, no, I'm not. It's funny. I only got that after I grown the beard. But prior to that, like I was like, I guess fully white passing sort of thing. And like, I don't know, like there's this, I don't know what explains this kind of like this resentment kind of thing where like somebody migrates to a new country, like the second generation, it's often the second generation where it's like full resentment and like hatred of the whole society and whatever. But I can't understand it. It's like, oh, like two guys like said I was hairy in like grade 2. I want to like fucking destroy Australia. I don't understand. It's sick. Like I hate that mindset. I think Sufism helped me. I mean, I felt a lot of resentment. I mean, I grew up in post 9/11 America. Jokingly, I was called a terrorist by all kinds of people. I had people threaten me in middle school for being a Muslim. On every 9/11 anniversary, I would get so many comments. Teachers even would make comments about my culture and to me even. And that's all right. I mean, it was a different era, dude. Early 2000s there was no wokeness at all. Like I remember one time they showed us a movie that depicted the neighborhood my dad grew up in southern Tehran called Children of Heaven. And I grew up in a slum in southern Tehran. He was just an educational, allowed him to go abroad and become what he was. God bless his heart. But the teacher was like, just so you guys can see how like the poor Muslims abroad, so you can like
Oh,
see
wow.
what the world is like. And we had to read this book
Yeah, that's
called
Orientalism as well.
I know, called The Breadwinner,
Yeah,
about Afghanistan and the Taliban. And the teacher gave a whole preamble about how Muslims are so backward. And I was sitting in the class, Muslims
that's
are so
pretty crazy. Yeah,
backwards and they're so terrible. So I went through all this and I had all these
yeah.
resentments and I felt them. And that partly informed why I moved abroad. And for those of people who've been following me for much longer than you know, I actually went through an Islamist phase where I was very resentful.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But when I lived abroad in Turkey and Iran and in Jordan and Kuwait, I pursued the Sufi path. And when I disengaged myself, my ego from the situation, I viewed it from just a more kind of neutral perspective. So these things that you describe, I was a leftist in college. And then when I moved to the Middle East, I was like fully on board with all the Islamist ideas, but I slowly disengaged myself and thought, okay, wait, let me put my ego aside. So yeah, it's painful. They have a lot of pain, and it's a lot of pain is informing their attitude to the greater society. Unfortunately, it's just toxicity all around, man. It's so sad.
Honestly, it's actually interesting. I actually kind of relate to that in a way because like I was like fully leftist like 4 or 5 years ago when I was like 18, 19 years old. You know, I went through like a full leftist phase, and like I guess that was when it was the zeitgeist, and like you were like encouraged to like try and like I guess it was almost like there was like a wider societal it was like encouraging you to like go back and like revisit your past trauma and stuff like that. So I remember like I'd be like going back and like thinking like, oh, those guys called me hairy in grade 2, like how dare they? But like
I went through that,
yeah, and I went through, and it probably like at that time I think I was quite resentful, and I think if you asked me back then, I would have been like, oh, I don't believe in Western civilization, that's cringe, or and I was certainly like, we've got this big thing in Australia, you probably don't know about it, but like it's sort of like Invasion Day stuff. So like in 4 days it's the National Day, Australia Day, and every year like the left, like the hard left go out.
They make it about the indigenous people and all that stuff.
They burn the flag. They burn the flag. They have up. They
Oh
hold
my
up.
God,
Flags, like it's crazy because it started out as change the date, and back in the day, like I was a change the date type person, but then it's now at this point, and it's gotten a lot more radicalized as well since October 7 and everything, where like they're literally, these guys put out posts and stuff where they're like, make sure you go out and behead a Captain Cook statue, burn the Australia flag. They hold signs that say like abolish Australia. Australia's a piece of shit. Burn the colony to the ground and stuff like that. And I've now reacted so strongly
from antagonizing your country and your society.
I know,
I get where it's coming from, but it's so misplaced.
It comes from resentment, and I think I went through like a phase of resentment, and I was like I had that sort of lefty phase, and it's like I kind of like purged it from myself, sort of thing, because I think it was, for me, it was kind of like a bit of a different type of experience. It was probably more because it's funny, all these guys would say like Drew's the biggest sort of like CIA stooge, like liberal, like regime change hack sort of thing. But like when I started out as an activist on China back in like 2019. And immediately sort of like lefties started making that accusation to me. And my response to that was to like go even more to the left and be like, oh, listen, I'm against both empires, the American empire, the Chinese empire, neither Beijing nor Washington, D.C. or whatever. And I think the way I ended up, and like that's when I like, you know, then that was also peak wokeness. And when everyone was like talking about how like, you know, we should revisit past trauma, I was like thinking, oh my God, the West, it's so racist, irredeemable. And then it's like the way I got out of it was that just by virtue of the things that I cared about, which was like China, Tibet, Uyghurs, which is like, it's never going to be popular on the left because it's like China is like in the West and the left, like this big.
No, because they're just they call others reactionary, but they're the reactionaries because all they do is just say America bad, anyone who's against America good, so China good. And it's just, literally you go to these societies. I mean, I've been to China. It's just like, this is not a better alternative than what we have. I'm sorry, ultimately, despite all of their infrastructure achievements or whatever, it's just not better than what we have. So.
Literally, it's literally just America bad. That's their mindset. And basically what woke me up out of it over the end was like, you know, I kept on doing all this activism for like years and years. And like, I would always try and like appease the leftists to my left. So I'd be like, I'd go to the big refugee rallies, I'd go to like the Invasion Day rallies and all this sort of stuff. But these people still want to be dead at the end of the day.
No, you can't appease them. There's no appeasement. You know,
they want to ultimately kill you at the end of the day.
People whose politics are fringe and driven by resentments, you can never appease them or reason with them unless you're full lockstep. And also, they'll never produce anything good, and they'll ultimately implode. The question is, how soon and how much damage will they do before they'll implode? That's really the problem. So they'll never rule, you know, like let's say if Hitler had won World War II, just like the USSR imploded, you know, the Reich would have imploded. It's just, okay, every Jew in Europe would have been killed, every Gypsy would have been killed. So it's just a matter of how much in damage. So the left movement against enforcing crime and all that stuff and open borders, it's going to implode, right? It imploded on a national level. When it'll be repudiated in New York City, who knows? But it's just a question of how much damage to the social fabric and social trust and institutions, and how many New Yorkers will move out. It's just how much destruction will they reap before they're, you know, laid to rest, basically. And and I fear that it'll be a lot.
Literally that, man. Because like, it was just a point where I just woke up to myself. I'm like, I'm not suicidal. I don't hate myself. This whole masochism, like these people, like there was a big moment for me. You might have seen like memes, like when I've criticized Islamic extremism, like Dilly Hussein, who's like one of like the big chief.
Yeah, he's nuts. I don't...
Yeah, he's a nutter. But he found this Times Magazine article. It was what happened to me. It was just this stupid, crazy story. I won't go into too much detail because you're the podcast guest. But basically, like I was protesting outside the London Chinese embassy like one day back in 2022, and I thought I was being funny. Like I was ringing the doorbell and just trolling them and stuff like that. And like and what happened? It was actually so mental. What happened? Like they literally like called up the police and they're like, "This guy's done a bomb threat. We've got an email with his name on it." And dude, it's how easy is it to use like Proton Mail?
To just say exactly.
That's literally what they did. And so like British police took it so serious. They come up with the guns. Like I get rear stack handcuffed.
For you, they took it seriously. For ISIS and Anjem Chowdhury and all those jihadis.
The crazy thing.
Oh, ISIS pamphlet, join ISIS, brother. They're okay, but you're a bomb threat.
Dude, here's the crazy thing, right? Like Muhammad, you know Muhammad Hijab?
Yeah, of course. I hate him, but I've talked to him. He's blocked me on Twitter now.
Right. Yeah, he's a bit of another mental case. This is so funny. He had a Uyghur rally outside the London Chinese embassy.
Yeah, where he tore his shirt off and whatever.
Yeah. And he was like, and it was so crazy. He was like, "Do you not think when you start a war with the Uyghurs, you do not start a war with the Muslims?" And then he throws his shirt, and then they all go like,
into the embassy. Yeah. It's so ridiculous.
So mental. Like, and I remember looking at back when I was like a full Uyghur actor. I remember looking at him like, guys, the optics here are so shit. Like, don't do this.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
Nothing happens to them, but I got, literally locked up. So I
know it's and also people like hijab are not the friends the Uyghurs want, because the best case in terms of Western perception, I think, for any state is to make it seem like a secular nationalist movement. And ultimately my perception is the problem they have is more that they're Turkic than that they're Muslim, because the Han Muslims, the Hui and the other Muslim ethnicities are not faring as badly, right? So it should just be about the...
There's sinification of the mosques for Hui mosques as well. So, like, for example, they remove domes, they remove Arabic script and stuff like that. But you're right that, like, Uyghur, it's especially hard.
Obviously, being anything but a Han secular person is at some level not great. But the worst part of the trifecta of problems is, they're a different religion, they live in the border zone, and they're Muslim, and they're a different ethnicity. I think the ethnicity, like if they were Han living there, it wouldn't matter, right? So it should just be framed as this is an ethnic thing. And the Palestinians also have this issue with their messaging, although they're better, is that when it gets to Islamic, when people like Muhammad Hijab, it becomes less sympathetic to the world and to Western societies who you need their ear, right? If you just make it about national liberation, then you can say, hey, didn't America do this? Didn't South Africa do this? Then it's in conversation with respectable movements. But if you make it just jihadi, Islamist, Khilafat stuff, it's just going to look like ISIS and the Taliban to Westerners.
It's crazy because, like, Al-Sharaa, like, I read a book about it, and like basically that was like the author was explaining, like that was one of the key reasons why Al-Sharaa, like, it was obviously like a 15-year process, but like they eventually started moving away from that sort of thing because they realized like they could never win if they were like
optics matters. Optics matters. Literally. I mean, look, he's liberalized so much. He cut the beard, removed the turban, but even his little refusal to shake hands, they made a huge stink about it. These stupid optics matter.
I actually thought that was a bit ridiculous. Because I do know that like there are. I've seen, for example, like Orthodox Jewish women.
No, it's so stupid. But look, Saudi Arabia does it because they get the optics part. Right, they understand the optics. So yes, maybe up until 5 minutes ago, they had beheading square in Riyadh, and they had apps where your wife's location is. What's up?
They've got beautiful optics now, though, with like the Riyadh.
Believe it. Yeah, I believe they got right. But even then, they would shake hands with women when they would meet women in America because they knew Americans really are obsessed with this sign of this is like the litmus test: alcohol and shaking hands. I don't know why these two things. Do you have alcohol and do you shake hands? Then you're check. Then you're a good Muslim.
You know what? Like,
I don't understand.
It's funny because even just from a realpolitik perspective, Al-Sharaa should have shaken the hands because, like,
for sure,
probably immediately, like every Western country on earth would have recognized the Syrian state.
I know. It's stupid, maybe he doesn't fully grasp how pressing an issue that is. And
It's a
there is
bit
a big
dumb, but
double
yeah,
standard, like he's like Ben Shapiro, maybe he does, but someone like him is
yeah.
unlikely to shake a woman's hand or is
I'm not sure
likely
with
to
Ben Shapiro,
essentially
but
have the same. What's up?
I'm not sure with Ben Shapiro, but yeah, I've certainly seen like I've literally
Someone
seen in
like
real life.
him, basically, an
Yeah,
Orthodox Jew, whether modern
yeah,
Orthodox or Hasidic, are very likely to not just not shake hands, but more or less have all the same like medieval Abrahamic mores about
there
life
there
that
there are
Muslims
some very
do.
conservative social
Yeah, even
thinking
more
people
honest, like there's some sects in Brooklyn, New York, of Orthodox
that are,
Jews
yeah,
that make
really
any
hardcore.
Muslim look like an atheist compared to how religious
Oh,
they
look,
are, so to speak.
some of the guys in Brooklyn are really extreme. The
Yeah,
funny thing is like the way this conversation started though was like yeah, like so I got locked up and everything, but then it
yeah,
was just like the Twitter reaction where like all these leftists that I've spent all these years appeasing and everything were like all just celebrating, like,
they're
haha,
happy.
Drew's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You
And
can't
it's like,
appease them, man.
dude, past a certain point, you're like, am I fucking suicidal? No. If
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
then I can't have this ideology of self hatred. That's
I
probably when
agree
I like
completely. Yeah.
really woke. I think that's how I broke the sort of like full wokeness conditioning sort of
That's so
thing.
unfortunate that they would cheer you on for getting arrested for some stupid
Dude, it was like,
dictatorial regime's bomb threat,
dude, it was
fake or
so stupid. Like,
whatever.
it was basically like 5 years of death threats and all this constant bullshit from like extremist left wing people who like they just post stuff going like, "We hope Drew gets raped. We hope Drew gets killed." And it's like, past a certain point, you have to be self respecting enough to be like,
I
these
agree
people are like,
completely. Yeah.
it's like if these people treat you as the enemy, you actually have to just say, "Okay, they're my enemy."
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, I
that's it.
agree.
Yeah, literally.
You have to
That's
just follow your conscience and your heart, and if you spend your time trying to appease people, they'll never be appeased. It reminds me of that Ali Luke's, is that her name? That
oh yeah,
smell
there's a
PhD
smell
lady
PhD lady.
who
Yeah, yeah.
recently, like, apparently a black woman tweeted that Indians smell
Oh
weird, and then
yeah,
she
yeah,
said
yeah.
that's racist, and she was accused of being anti-black, so then she backed off and
She deleted
apologized
it and she
profusely.
backed
It's like,
down.
no, that's not how it works. You can't win with these people. You just have to say, shut
Literally.
up, I don't care. And then you'll win. That's what Trump did every time they wanted him to back down and show weakness, he doubled down and showed strength, and he earned more respect.
Literally, man, like when you that's what I've learned as well. Like, and probably the way I'm most Trumpian is that like when you apologize to these people, they smell blood in the water and then they just want to
Yep.
they go in for the kill.
They
And
tap, they
yeah,
grab you. Yep,
and
exactly.
that poor smells
We're
PhD
honest.
lady because it's probably they got to start investigating her now. They'll try find like
Yeah,
maybe
they'll
15
cancel
years
her.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll find 15 years ago maybe she had like a comment on like Twitter
Yeah,
or no
absolutely.
on like
Yeah.
Tumblr saying something bad. She'll get destroyed. The poor lady, she doesn't understand how it works.
No, poor thing. I mean, she probably just spent all her time being a nerd, doesn't know how these.
Yeah,
She just went
literally,
viral on accident, essentially, and I sympathize with her.
literally.
But she should have someone in her ear telling her, "Just double down. Just tell them to shut up." Your fans will respect you more. People who don't know you might
So
not
sad.
care, and those people will never be won over anyway. They'll resent you. All they respect is strength. They don't respect
Exactly.
weakness, right? This is
That's
another thing
literally it.
that Westerners generally don't understand, is that other cultures perceive openness and humility and introspection as a weakness to be exploited, not a strength to
That's
be
China.
respected.
Dude, that's exactly how I see it when it comes to the
And
CCP.
Muslims
Yeah.
see a
And
lot of
Russia,
this Western stuff as just like, what? You guys are so silly. And like Muslims move to America and they see this disorder in New York, and all that tells them is you guys don't give a crap about anything in your society. So why
oh, it's
should I? Why
yeah,
should I care more than you? Basically, is the point of view that many have, right? So you come to a
yeah,
society and there's no law and order, then why should I contribute to that law and order? Like the migrants I talked about who jumped the subway. I paid for a couple
yeah.
before who were gonna jump. But one poor guy, she was going to turn away. He asked the police officer, "Can you let me jump it? Because I don't have money." And I swiped him. And I realized,
Well,
this poor guy, maybe if he sees enough people jumping who are like native New Yorkers, he's like, well, I'm not even from here. If you don't care, why should I care? So I don't
literally.
even blame him if he would start to jump. He would
Right.
just say, what? This is how it works here, right? No one cares about anything.
Dude,
So
it's actually the
it's
broken windows. It's literally the broken windows theory of policing.
yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
actually true.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, my heart broke. It was a cold winter night, and the poor guy walked up to the station. He saw the police officer. He had enough heart in him to at least respect the police officer. And
Yeah, yeah. That's
and
sad actually.
said, "Can you let me in? I don't have any money. I literally have no money for this." And I was like, and he was gonna walk out into the cold, probably to walk 10 more blocks to try the next one. And I was like, oh my God, I can't allow this to happen. This is sadaqa
That's
for us.
well, good on you.
Helping
That's
the
sad.
poor, it's $3. What's $3? But just the humanity of it. I was like, wow, he cares. I was like, that touched me
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah, no, wow, wow. Okay, here's an interesting question, and I'm
Sure, yeah.
conscious that we've been going for so long, so
No
maybe
worries.
I
Yeah,
should
go
wrap
ahead,
up.
please. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Very interesting conversation. So, like drawing this all back together,
Yeah.
we've got like this big culture of masochism, self-hatred in the West, this big crisis of demoralization, lack of confidence. And then in the face of this, like you have, for example, especially in Europe, like you've got like even in America too, you've got like quite aggressive extremist Islamist kind of protest movements, etc. People who are like openly like I don't know, like people calling for the destruction of America, all this stuff. And then you've also got like, of course, like rising extremist far right too. And you've also got the extremist far left and like these like the communists who are like they're the ones like cheering on Luigi Mangione. And like there was a guy there was this guy in my country, and he's a Trotskyist, and he's running for election as a Senate candidate. He's a couple years old. He's only like 28 or something like that, only a couple years older than me. And he had a video where he was saying, oh, Trotsky was a little bit incorrect when he opposed acts of individual terrorism. He was right to do so. He basically said, in the context of early 20th century life, when the left was much more powerful and we could have a full revolution, he was right to do so. But in the current situation where the left is really weak, we should have acts of individual terrorism. That's why Luigi Mangione is good, because it helps people talk about the left. This is literally what like a Trotskyist socialist hard left candidate.
And he's like allowed to participate in civil society and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is my kind of question to you, right? Like, I think that liberalism actually has to be much more muscular. I think like basically someone like that, they shouldn't be allowed to be participating in civil society. They shouldn't be allowed to run for election. When it comes to like hate preachers, extremists, Islamist fundamentalist types and stuff, like I think there has to be some level of deportations, etc. I think there has to be basically like prescribing of extremist far right and far left groups, and basically saying you guys can't run for election if you don't believe in like, you guys just can't be part of civil political society if you don't believe in the fundamentals of the Constitution, fundamentals of democracy. You just can't participate. That's what I think. And it's hard because then people go, oh, well, then you're sacrificing all your liberal values for a dead ideology. There's nothing left. There's no freedom. Blah, blah, blah. Like that's their case against what I'm arguing for. That they're going, well, if liberalism has to impose like a police state to survive, why should it survive? And of course, I don't want a police state, etc. But I think there has to be some level of, I don't know, like muscularity to liberalism where it's like, just stop being suicidal. Stop letting people walk all over it. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I mean, the society only works insofar as everyone's civil, nice, kind, smart, thoughtful Anglo person, right? Or Germanic person. The second you throw in other forms of dealing with problems, the system falls apart and it has to compromise itself. So I had this tweet where I said the Sicilian mafia arrived and they started shooting each other down. Yeah, and then they what?
That was such a good tweet. Was that the tweet where you said? Was that the tweet where you basically said, like Anglo society didn't have a solution to the mafia, so they basically did RICO laws, which is basically unconstitutional.
Yeah. So essentially, we didn't have
restate that for anyone listening.
So we didn't have an Anglo way to deal with it. So they were used to dealing with the Western ways of policing, which is you arrest someone, you question them, you get them to snitch, you find some way, and then they didn't realize, oh, like you would arrest an Anglo gangster and say, you really want to go to jail for your boss? Just snitch him out, and then falls apart, right? But then you have these Sicilian notions of omerta. And when I say Western, weird people don't have honor, I don't mean like in the basic dictionary definition. Everyone in the world has honor, but in the old world sense of honor. They had no honor culture. They couldn't possibly comprehend a low-level associate going to jail for 20 years to protect his boss, but they have these notions, right? So then they tried from like the 1890s, from when these Sicilians arrived, and then all the way until the 80s, they couldn't dislodge them. Like a century had gone by, and basically, like you have the Anglo tradition of judge by trial or jury by trial, right? That doesn't exist in many societies. It didn't exist in the Mongols. It didn't exist in many in Islamic societies. A perfect parallel didn't exist. And then the Sicilians realized, oh, wait, you can just muscle or bribe one of the jurors and he can overturn the ruling. So you had John Gotti waltzing into lower Manhattan courtrooms, beating federal case after federal case after federal case. So then they realized, wait a minute, we have to start to fight dirty. That's why America has something like civil asset forfeiture. Right. This is extremely illiberal, but we wink and nod and say, okay, as long as the state will use it to deal with people who are themselves illiberal, these mafiosi, for example, and same with RICO, wink and nod, only for the Italians and the Albanians and the ethnic gangs. That, see, the thing is, you can only treat people with a principle insofar as they themselves believe in the principle. Right. So like if the Italian mafia uses the amendments in a I can't think of basically they use it against its principle in a cynical way is maybe the word for it, right? They use this, like, for example, the idea that you have to prove a criminal conspiracy. Like, everyone knew that the mafia was a thing, but they couldn't they were just that little level of proving it by the Anglo standard. So every time, so Anglo societies go through an ordeal of civility, and then when these groups come in, they have to go through an ordeal of incivility to dislodge them. And it's not for nothing that the guy who dislodged the mafia, Rudy Giuliani, was himself an Italian, right? The Italians, and this is depicted in The Sopranos, were in the FBI going after their fellow Italians because they knew how they thought. They grew up in the same neighborhoods. They grew up on the same side. But you also had the ethnic Irish mobs, the Chinese mobs, the Albanians. Every time you import a foreign thing, you have to undo an Anglo civility and become uncivil. So ethnic gangs require Anglos to think on ethnic terms.
That's the problem.
Using sexuality. Using sexuality as a targeted way forces them to think about, have honor culture with women again, to tell white women to not go out. White women now tell me that I don't go out at night or only go out with my husband or boyfriend. That didn't exist in the past, right? So every time you bring in, and Islamism is another thing. When Anglos have no sensibility of pushing religion on other people. They don't even talk about religion. You don't even know what damn near what sect they belong to. Then when you bring in people who have the sensibility of pushing, then you have to say, oh my God, we have to. So now Anglo societies, they have to think like a rape culture, and they have to think like an Islamist culture, and they have to think like a Sicilian culture, and think like a Mexican culture. And then you import all these incivilities of every third world country, and you have to tackle them, and they don't even know where to begin. It took them 100 years to dislodge the mafia, and it still exists. The mafia still exists. Luigi Mangione wasn't part of the mafia, but it's not for nothing that in his hometown in southern Italy, they shoot each other over their disputes. You know, he could have sued his insurance company. Why didn't he go the Anglo way? Because he's Luigi. He's not, he's Louis, you know?
The crazy thing is, I think he didn't even have health insurance with that specific company. Like,
there you go. So it was just some idea of making a statement, right? It's not for nothing. 100 years ago, Italian leftists were setting off bombs in America and doing assassinations. And an Italian leftist 100 years later set off killed someone in the street, right? When that happened, did anyone expect him to be like a WASP kid from a New England family who was like from a really genteel, you know, Boston Brahmin background? No, we were all unsurprised. You know,
you do sometimes get people. I don't know, like Ted Kaczynski, for example. I guess he's Polish.
Well, he's Polish. He doesn't come from this like old stock of very, like, again, people who haven't interacted with, like, I've been in the UK, I've lived in the Northeast. Like, when you interact with these people, they're just of a totally different sort than people like me. We have no sensibilities in common. And I know that maybe this makes you unassimilated, but like, it's hard to appreciate how even other white ethnics like Poles and Italians and etc. have zero sensibilities in common with these people. You cannot relate to people who eat bland food at 5 p.m. and call it dinner. You cannot relate to people who listen to classical music and who, you know, love to play chess and who learn to play the piano. You cannot relate to people who read War and Peace for fun. Like, they're just not us. We're not them. They're not us. And the more us enters their society, not saying it'll fall apart, because America hasn't fallen apart, but it'll make life difficult. And my question for them is, why are you making your life difficult for yourself? Why make your life unnecessarily difficult? I don't know.
This is the big question, because it's like, if you have to keep on doing things like RICO laws and increasingly illiberal things to try and keep society together, like, why are you doing that if it's a choice to bring people in? Because
it's insanity. They're committing suicide. It's like they're killing themselves slowly, basically.
It's crazy, because like in Australia at the moment, the response to, like, so we've had like actual Hezbollah rallies in the streets of Sydney and stuff like that, because there's a large like Lebanese Shia population in the suburbs of Western Sydney, and people were bringing Nasrallah portraits out, and like they was chanting Kaiba Kaiba Ya Yahud, which is like, you know, that's referencing an early massacre in
sure.
Like really bad stuff. And then recently there's been a wave of anti-Semitic firebombings, like firebombings of synagogues, firebombings of a Jewish preschool, like just really, really bad stuff.
No, it's terrible, yeah.
And the government's response to all this is, like, the Prime Minister will come out and he'll go, Australia's the most successful multicultural country on earth. This is not who we are as a
Just
multicultural
cope.
country.
It's just cope.
Yeah, it's cope because it's obviously not true if there's fire bombings of synagogues,
For
etc.
sure, yeah.
And then they respond to this by like introducing like hate speech laws. So they're like, okay, we're gonna have tougher laws against like incitement to racial violence. And like, I don't support hate speech. Of course, I want to like see like Hezbollah people crack down upon it, etc. But it's like that's a band-aid solution. Like the question more would be, why are there guys who support Hezbollah in Sydney? I don't understand because it's not
right. Yeah,
like,
it doesn't
part of Australian
like,
culture. It's just not. It's just not.
What is this adding? Like, what is it contribute
literally,
to
what does it add?
society to import every third world ethnic dispute? The UK and Northeastern United States have nothing to do with Israel, Palestine, nothing to do with Jews, nothing to do with Muslims. Why should New York City become a place where these conflicts are adjudicated?
Well, you know what's funny? I think you said this, and I think you said this the other day, and I actually thought about it, and I was like, it's completely true. Dude, if you look at Israeli society, like the peacenik, the left movement is kind of like Ashkenazi, like European and like the most extremist
They're Middle Easterners. Like, they're us. They think like us. Exactly.
And Ben Gvir basically sees things in the same way that like
Iraqi neighbors, his Iraqi neighbors, he sees things the exact same way as the people in Iraq where he's from. That's what's funny is fundamentally he is more representative of the future of that society, because this dwindling, non-reproducing, moribund minority of European-minded Ashkenazis are not going to be the future of that society. If you think Netanyahu is bad, he's a Polish guy, grew up in Philly.
Oh, even him compared to Ben Gvir is like,
wait till these Middle Easterners born and raised in Israel are starting to run that society. Just wait till the disaster. It'll just be a Muslim society. It'll be like a middle income, semi-developed, illiberal state.
There certainly wouldn't be Tel Aviv pride parades anymore.
No, for sure not. Yeah, I mean, look. Yeah. I just wish that they would just wake up, people who have this like European weird civility culture society, and realize that, look, people like me and you exist in these societies because we value what they have. This calm, stable, safe, prosperous. And what's the point of ruining it just to bring unlimited qualities of us? Either bring low quantities at intervals, or just filter for the people who are like us, who either don't want to shake the boat or agree. Like, I feel like I'm in the don't want to shake the boat category, and you're in the agree with the society category. So people like us who won't mess with things, and just keep it smooth sailing. Why do you have to destroy your society as an act of charity to people from crappy places? I don't get it.
I think like probably the reason I was able to assimilate so much is like the fact that like, if I had grown up in a neighborhood that was like, if like half of Brisbane was like Greek Cypriot, like, if I went to school and it was all Greek and everything was Greek, like, how could I have become Australian? I don't know.
You wouldn't probably. You'd be Greek.
I know, and I made like I made a conscious decision when I was young. Like, I wanted to be Australian. Like, I wanted that to be my primary identity.
But it's realistic too. What is Greece to you? Greece is some far away, distant place that your ancestors are from. And this is another thing that Muslims in the West need to realize. You're not going back. Habibi, Qalbi, Azizi, Azizam, Hayati, Sevgili, whatever word you know. I did it. I went back. And believe me, you can't handle it. I was raised in Detroit. You weren't raised where I was raised. You can't handle those third world streets, okay? You can't live there. You're first world. You were naz parverde, as we say, cultivated with ease. So see how nice Persian is? You were cultivated in ease. You're a first worlder. Your world is the first world. So just accept that fact and come to a nice middle ground, like our brother Drew is, right? We acknowledge your heritage, but you acknowledge that you live in a new country, and just chill out. But
the funny thing is, like, I still have my heritage. Like, I'm Greek Orthodox. I hope to be married in a Greek Orthodox church. Like, I celebrate Greek. I celebrate Greek Easter. I love Greek food. I love Greek Australian humor. And it's funny because like Greek Australian is almost like its own sort of category. Like, when I do encounter like when I encounter another Greek Australian, it's like, it feels like you're encountering a bit of like a brother sort of thing. And
no, absolutely, and that's fine. That's human nature. It's totally fine. Yeah.
But this is the funny thing, right? Like, so I'm Greek Cypriot, right? And this is actually kind of sad. If I went back to Greek Cyprus and I was forced to live in Greek Cyprus, I would literally feel like a foreigner. But if I were to meet a Greek Australian, I'm like, yeah, you're my bro. And I think it's because like it's like I'm fully cultivated sort of in Australian society. And I don't know, like what is this thing? I guess like again, I feel bad for you because it's getting later and we've been talking so long.
And we can meet again, by the way. We can continue.
Yeah. We certainly. but I think British Islam in particular, it's a really bad state, and it's
I
in a really
agree.
bad
Yeah, it's
state,
not good. It's not
and
good
it's
for
like
either party.
I know. And the funny thing is, I think it was Drukpa Kunli who made this observation. And you know what's interesting about it? You know what's interesting about it? Like, this guy's right wing. He's such a funny guy, but you know, he's a Lebanese Maronite.
Yeah, I learned that recently, which shocked me, but also didn't shock me because he has our lens. He gets it.
Yeah,
he gets it
he's
because he's foreign.
As like an anthropologist, right? Like,
Yes,
it's so funny. And he's actually like I learned this from him, right? Like, he made this observation that like British Islam is its own particular thing. Like, it's its own sub-variant. It like a Gulf Arab will see that and be like, what the fuck's going on here?
It's
like,
unrecognizable. Yeah, it's not
literally
recognizable.
Is. And I had this funny question I wanted to ask you, but like just the aesthetics, right? Like Persian Islamic Civilization. You have these works of like towering artistic genius, like the Pink Mosque of Shiraz, Sheikh Lutfullah Mosque, Jame Mosque of Yazid, like, you know, these beautiful sapphire mosques. And I'm not Muslim, but these places are like so beautiful. Like, it's just literally part of world heritage. It's like triumphs of human civilization. It's amazing, like Persian beautiful culture. And you compare that to the ghettos of like,
I know, it's terrible.
It's like, my God,
it's just a matter of wealth. You know, all societies, these were produced and patronized by wealthy elites. And the sad reality of British Islam is that it's just more working class than anything. So it's fundamentally just a class problem. You know, take any society and just make them entirely of the low class. Look, you take, first of all, most of them come from working class or rural backgrounds in their home country, and then put them in these decaying post-industrial towns in the UK. I don't think any group would thrive in such a condition from any part of the, like, even another European culture.
This is the thing, right? Like, who came up with that idea? Because it's actually not even fair or nice to the migrants themselves.
It's the worst. I know, it's like the worst situation to be in.
If you're coming from a Pakistani rural background and you want to have a better life, and then you're plopped into like Luton, which is like a really
like the worst.
Like, how is it going to work for anyone? I actually feel bad for the Pakistani migrants themselves.
I was going to say, as an outsider, just looking, I feel bad for everyone. I feel bad that the UK is in decline. I feel bad that these poor northern white Britons have an awful life. I feel bad that all these random Pakistanis are plopped there and they're going through this trouble of assimilating and their identity is all confused, and that there's poison is happening. Like, the vast majority of both sides are just like average, decent people. And they're just in the worst possible situation. Like, Tommy Robinson's family and like the community of Pakistanis, but they're all just like average, normal, poor people in a terrible situation. And that society is just not equipped to help them in any way. It's so tragic.
It really, that's the thing. It really is like the worst situation possible. Like, of course, in such a scenario with like really bad economics and like, you know, rape happening, like there's going to be explosive social tension. And
I know, it's so bad. It's just terrible.
So bad.
It's just like, and this is why I hate when on my side, it's like, oh, we're ashamed of it, don't talk about it. And on the white side, it's like, oh, we don't want to be racist. It's like, no, the sunlight is the best disinfectant.
On both sides. That's the thing. It's a culture.
I know. It's bad. We need to uproot this issue, and it can only be uprooted by facing it head on. And I think that thing about, look, what I would say ultimately, I have so many haters. But what I would say is, you want someone like us, where you're rational, you're clear-minded, you're moored, you're kind of more centrist than anything, looking at problems from a pragmatic point of view, be like, we can't have ethnic strife. We can't have sexual violence imported from the third world. We can't have violence on the subway. Let's settle this in a sane center-left, like Bill Clinton way, not where the far right will take control of society, and then you have like lynchings and riots and insanity. It's like, instead of hating on me, be like, look, a sane person from the Muslim side is going to help us, instead of being like, oh, you know, anyway.
Dude, well, that's exactly how I think regarding you as well. Like, you're literally the same voice that should be elevated like way more. And
you're too kind.
Man, like, I don't want people like Tommy Robinson to like control Britain, the levers of state.
That's the sad part, is that he becomes the voice by default. Like, they say, why did Elon Musk amplify him? You know, Elon's another American who doesn't understand how.
Well, Elon's an Afrikaner.
He's an African. He's an African. Our African-American. My African-American, as Trump would probably call him. But in any case, now he's American. He doesn't understand the UK. But why isn't there? Right, yeah. Oh, he's Anglo. He's not Afrikaner.
Yeah, Anglo-South African.
Okay,
but still, great. Obviously, like, it's a very
So he's not a Dutch, but not one of the Dutch speakers. But
the Afrikaners were way more intense than the Anglo-South African.
I didn't know that at all.
Well,
Right.
actually, I'm pretty sure. Again, I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure like apartheid was mainly driven by
Yes,
Afrikaners.
I mean
Rather,
the
there's a lot
word
of,
is an
yeah, and
Afrikaner
there
word.
was
Yeah.
there was
So
actually like political struggle between Anglo South Africans and apartheid South and Afrikaner South Africans. However, that said, obviously a lot of Anglo South Africans were part of apartheid as well. Like,
yeah,
yeah,
but no, I'm willing to believe that the Anglos were more amenable. I mean, look at the track record. But in any case, he just does probably maybe he doesn't fully understand who this guy is. But the tragedy of it is that okay, let's say this guy is odious and he's a football hooligan, like Piers Morgan has
yeah,
informed us all. Okay, who do
yeah,
we amplify as the sane voice from whether the Muslim side or the white side or both? What, like
yeah.
Andrew Tate? Like, where's the sane British voice who can get up
The
and tell
problem,
me what the problem is in a sane? And I guess Piers Morgan is a little bit of that, but just a normal person and not obfuscate and just tell me
you know,
honestly what's going on.
you know what's sad? Because like someone like Mehdi Hassan, who's like a really like he's objectively an eloquent
He
speaker.
has
He's
like a brain
obviously
worm now, man. Now he's
yeah,
just he's
I
lost
know.
it.
He's lost it.
Yeah,
But the sad thing is like he's objectively an eloquent speaker. He's educated. He's
yeah,
highly
he
polished.
is.
If he was sane, he could be like, yes, this is objectively a really bad thing, and we need to address
Yeah,
it in
yeah.
our own community. And that would do wonders for social tension. But the thing
I
is,
agree. Yeah.
he went on Piers Morgan and like literally he just had this knee jerk thing was like, what about the white pedos? And it's like
I
that
know
doesn't
it's
fucking
such
solve
a
the issue.
it's such a stupid what about like literally what
I
aboutism. But
know.
no, let's be
Yeah.
honest, man. As people from my society, I made that tweet that got like 3 million views where people like holy shit. Like I literally
Which
grew
one
up in
was
a
it?
society. The one about me talking about how it's just normalized sexual predation against children is like
Oh
semi-normalized
yeah,
in many and
yeah.
like up until recently, like I grew up like with the genuine fear of God instilled in me and my family, like don't talk to strange men, don't take
Oh yeah,
tax,
I
don't
remember
take
that tweet
rides,
now. Yeah, yeah.
I was groped several times growing up, and I
Yeah.
grew up around a culture where there was like jokes about this type of thing, or it was in the air, it was real.
Like
You know, we need to
male predation on
yeah,
younger
exactly.
children.
We need
Yeah,
to
yeah.
admit that this is kind of a problem, and that also
Yeah.
when you have a sexually repressed society, people will basically they will lash out in unhealthy ways. So let me
Yeah.
put it this way: maybe the people who initiate the sex gangs and all kinds of awful behaviors, the initiators, are genuinely terrible, irredeemable people. But I wonder what percentage of the participation comes from sexual repression in Muslim societies. You have men who aren't married. There's no dating. There's no
Yeah.
girls available. All of a sudden, you know, they're in a situation where they're being impressed upon. They have this ethnic resentment. Maybe like 10 or 20% are genuine rapists, and like 30 or 40 or 50% is opportunism and sexual repression
It,
and views of the other.
it's really bad because like you're reading some of the sentencing remarks and stuff like that. Like you're right that like you're right in an extent like that they were obviously like the ringleaders who were like literally ideologically motivated,
Yeah.
really hateful, evil individual. But the judges and the courts basically described that there was also like another category of offender, which was like they were kind of like the hangers on, and it was like
Right. Yeah. They can be pushed in one direction or the
and
other,
the crazy
you
thing
know?
was that like some of these guys you'd read about them and they just sounded like NPCs. Like it's almost like they literally didn't understand what they were doing was evil or wrong. And
Yeah.
it's
It's
just
unfortunate. You know, look,
it's
there's some reality. Like, there was a lot of unfair backlash, I think, to some elements of wokeism. Like, with the whole like rape related thing, where when I went to college, they told us, you know, this or that thing. Like, you know, I don't think that's terrible. Like, yes, it is a bit cringe to say that there is a rape culture. Maybe it's the wrong
yeah,
term to use, and it's true
yeah.
that the West is not as bad as other places. But you know, if a young man's college experience includes a 20-minute quick talk, just setting the line, saying like, hey, this
Yeah,
is a non-negotiable, there's no
yeah,
iffiness. Because like even I growing up in that environment, I would see guys who
yeah,
they were like you would be like, you know, I don't
dude.
really
I knew,
trust you.
yeah, dude. Like at my university, like I knew
Yeah.
there were guys who like preyed on women, and obviously I
No, I mean,
hated
I
them. I
witnessed such
fight
a thing.
against
Look,
them.
man,
Yeah,
there was a time when I was never in a big partier, but there was times when I wasn't
yeah,
practicing that I would like go to parties tangentially, and
yeah.
I went to a handful of college parties, and like I even saw like a guy. I can't forget when I was 18, I was very impressionable, and he was like just like pouring vodka down the throat of like another college
I saw
freshman.
stuff like that. It's disgusting.
And I
Yeah, and
told him, I said, dude, I didn't know anything about drinking, but I knew that
yeah,
wasn't good. And I was like, you're going to get her
yeah,
too drunk, dude. And he said to me with no hint of shame, that's the point, dude. And I was like, it struck me. I was like, holy crap. Like, this culture is real. Like, what they taught, it's like not overblown.
it
There
does
is
actually exist.
genuinely,
It literally
and this
does
is like
exist.
the liberal enlightened West, where I mean, our Greek life at U of M actually was shut down for my senior year because there were so many like sexual assaults and questionable moments. Like
Yeah, yeah,
my wife's not her college, but a college near her, they discovered like a rape room in one of the frats or something, like a room, like not like that, but like there was a thing where like certain guys were dragging drunk girls into like the attic secretly, and like the frat got shut down. Like, look, even our own modern, you know, enlightened society has not conquered this issue, and
look at Jimmy, and look at, and in Britain, you've got the case of Jimmy Savile, who was like literally.
Right. Yeah. And in America, I mean, Elon talks about this often. On Twitter, he's like the last person to talk about it. Epstein. How many elites were there? Like Diddy just now. Like, we're not perfect. So does it surprise us that a country facing poverty and less, you know, Western culture is going to have these issues? No. So we shouldn't be embarrassed to say that rape culture exists in frats, or that some Muslim men don't respect women the way they should. We should just sunlight's the best disinfectant. Let it all be out there.
It literally is in every society and every culture. Like, it just where it will change is whether you can actually talk about it and try and oppose it.
Right. And look, every society and every ethnicity has crimes. There's a Dave Chappelle joke. He says every ethnicity has a crime. If you hear that a man shoots his wife and his kids and himself, it's a middle-class white man. If you hear
that's brutal, but yeah,
someone blew himself up in a bus, it's an Arab dude. If you hear someone shot up a gas station attendant robbing him, it's a black dude. And look, maybe it's rude to say, we all get that, right? Like, maybe it's in white society, the majority of women being predated upon is in the college frat kind of partying environment.
Probably, yes.
And maybe with Muslims, and maybe in Muslims, it's like older taxi drivers seeing drunk girls partying. And maybe, and look, every culture has its little dark corners. Let's just get rid of them all. Why do we have to let partisanship?
I totally agree.
Let's get rid of all. No one likes rapists. Does anyone want to get up and say, I'm here to defend them? No, so screw them all. Let's throw them all in prison forever and throw away the key.
Absolutely. Fully agree there. Maybe we'll do this as like the sort of like last question, because it's
absolutely.
But okay, so you recently tweeted Afghanistan is the only true white country on earth. Please explain this to us.
Sure. When the Aryans left Africa, they went in several directions, right? They went off into Germany, and that's famously this whole Nazi thing of we're Aryan or whatever. And then some of them went off east. So Iran literally means land of the Aryans. We always love to remind people of this. But the problem was the Aryans in Iran and in Europe, they were mixed with Arabs, with Turks. And in Europe, you had Neanderthals and all kinds of groups. So there's no real Aryans in Iran or in Europe. It's all fake Aryans. The Nazis just full of crap. And in Afghanistan, the Aryans went off into the mountains, and they hid in the high mountains where no one went. And that's where the purest, most refined specimens that I post on my Twitter of Aryans are. White face, red beard, blue, green eyes, just pure Chad physiognomy. I posted one today recently, just the purest Chad Aryan physiognomy, where the Germans, they're all Neanderthals. The Iranians were all Arabs, basically pretending to be Persians. But the true Aryan nation is Afghanistan, and it's the only white country with a positive birth rate. So I invite all white nationalists like Nick Fuentes, who don't like women and don't like Jews and hate modernity, to move to the last white nation, Afghanistan, where they can have a white civilizational rebirth and reclaim Alexander's Greek heritage in Afghanistan.
Fascinating. That was so fucking good. Dude, this is such a good conversation. Thank you, man.
We should do it again. I'm serious. We should do it again. And cool. I mean, maybe we should give it some time, and that way new material can come in the news. But I think people will be interested, because we're ostensibly, and I have to go after this, it's like it's 12 also. We're like, we're ostensibly should be very different. You're like a white Western muscular liberal. I'm like a representative of a culture that's like in theory against you. But I think what people can glean is that no, actually, if you're just like a sane person who's like a normie, you kind of will agree on most issues. It's just the insane people like the Islamists and the leftists who make it seem like civilizations are at war. That's where right-wingers are wrong.
Agree.
There is no conflict of civilization. Civilization has been generally the same. Stability, peace, some tolerance where it's needed, we disagree on details, right? Are gays okay? Are they not? But like civilization looks recognizable. It's all the same usually. It's this idiocy that it makes us clash.